Section 19 of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 19. Criminal or Victim? At the bottom of his trunk, Jérôme Fandor was foaming with rage, furious at being caught in the trap and uneasy as to how this adventure would end. Whilst he was realising that his unknown porters were carrying their heavy weight with difficulty to the pavement of rue Raffet, he made up his mind to a definite course of action. Regardless of consequences, he was going to shout, move about, make a regular disturbance, rouse the attention of the passers by, if there happened to be any, but at all costs he meant to get out of the trap. He saw a ray of hope. Madame Bourrat had accompanied her visitors as far as the gate. In presence of such a witness, they would at least hesitate to do him serious bodily harm when he made his presence unmistakably known, furious though they would be. He would take every advantage of the situation. Fandor was about to act. A second more and he would have started, when he heard them speaking. He kept quiet. "We must have a taxi, or at the very least a cab, to transport this big trunk. Do you know where one is likely to be found?" "I doubt if one will be passing at this hour, monsieur. We retire early in these parts. But if you like, Jules can go to the station." "That's settled. Let him go as fast as he can." "Well, that is reassuring," thought Fandor. "If these fine fellows take a cab, it is not with the intention of chucking my cage and me into the river, and that is what I feared most. They may be going to leave me in a cloak room till called for. Or they may pack us off as luggage to some destination unknown. Oh well, I shall only be a traveller without a ticket, and I shall be sure to find some way out of the difficulty. And then, what stuff for an article I shall have when I get back to La Capitale! What must they be thinking at the offices? It's 48 hours since I put foot in them. Never mind, when they know!" Fandor was listening with all his ears, but the bandits had little to say, and, when they did speak, their voices were plainly disguised. Was it as a general precaution, or was it on account of Madame Bourrat? But, unless they were known to her, why the necessity? If, however, she knew one or more of them personally, why, they must have disguised their faces and figures as well as their voices. If only he could have a peep at them! The sound of wheels made him suppose that Jules had succeeded in getting a cab at the Auteuil station. Then the trot, trot, trot of a horse became audible. A few moments later, a cab drew up at the edge of the pavement. A hoarse voice was heard. "It's not a long journey, I hope?" said the hoarse, grumbling voice of the cabman. "To police headquarters," replied the pretended police inspector. "We shall see about that," thought Fandor. "That address is to throw dust in Madame Bourrat's eyes. They will change their destination on the way, I bet on it. The brutes! Are they going to jam my cage and me on to the seat?" Fandor asked himself, for they had seized the trunk and were beginning to lift it up. "Am I to be stuck upside down beside the driver? I don't fancy so. We must weigh at least 90 kilos, as I weigh 70 myself." Fandor's mind was soon made easy on that score. After a fruitless attempt to hoist the trunk to the box seat, they decided to put it on to the back seat of the Victoria. One of the bandits planted himself on the little folding seat opposite the trunk; the other bandit mounted to the box seat next to the driver. The two bandits took leave of Madame Bourrat. The rickety old vehicle started off. Presently Fandor heard what he had expected to hear. One of his captors told the driver to take them to some other address than police headquarters. Owing to the rattling of the ramshackle cab (it lacked rubber tires), Fandor, though listening with ears astretch, could not hear one word distinctly. Soon pale gleams of light began to filter through the wickerwork. Dawn was near. "Ah, we shall soon reach our destination," thought Fandor. "I don't fancy my trunk lifters will wish to be seen with this turnout in broad daylight. Now where the deuce are we going?" In vain did Fandor strive to follow the route taken by the bandits. He had noted each shock and countershock produced by cobbled streets and smooth roads, by bumping against pavements, by crossed tram lines and sharp turnings. The cab stopped with a jolt and a jerk. The two men got out. The trunk was lifted down to the pavement. The driver was paid. He rattled off. "Now Trunk and I are in for it," thought Fandor. A bell pealed. A courtyard entrance gate was thrown open. The two men lifted the trunk, cursing under their breath at its weight. In passing under the archway, they called some name unknown to Fandor and so unintelligible that he could not remember it. Then it was a painful ascension. Up a staircase they went with prodigious effort, stopping on 2 landings. 2 floors, counted Fandor. "We are coming to the end, and all said and done, I would rather be in a house than at the bottom of the river." A key turned in a lock. The trunk was pushed rapidly inside, then the noise of a door being shut. Fandor was in a room, no doubt alone with the 2 bandits and at their mercy. He was plunged into complete darkness. Evidently the shutters were still closed. The noise made by footsteps on the floor showed that it was uncarpeted. Judging from the sound, there seemed to be little furniture and no hangings in the room. "And I in my cage, in an ordinary room, in a studio or in a hall," wondered Fandor. In any case, the fellows who had brought him there seemed anxious to avoid making a noise. Then he felt the cover of the wickerwork trunk bend slightly and heard it creak. For a moment he thought the 2 men were about to open his prison. He had his revolver ready. Every inch of him was on the defensive. Then he realised that his captors had merely seated themselves on the trunk to rest. They began to talk. "This," thought Fandor, "is splendid. I shall hear everything they say. Why, it is a conversation in my honour. What luck!" Fandor was delighted. Thanks to his position, he could hear some interesting secrets. He listened. Alas, he could hear every word they uttered, but he could not understand what they were saying. Fandor swore strictly to himself. The 2 wretches were conversing in German. To the best of his judgment, a good hour had passed since the false police inspector and his acolyte had left the room. They had simply drawn to the door behind them, not troubling to lock it, much to the joy of Jérôme Fandor. Absolute silence reigned. Fandor attempted some discreet movements as a test. The wickerwork creaked as he gently shook the trunk at short intervals. Not an answering sound came from outside. Menaced with cramp, Fandor felt that the moment of escape had arrived. He was certainly the only living soul in the place. Listen as he might, and his sense of hearing was acute, he could not hear any sound of breathing. Yes, the time to quit his prison had come. Fandor had with him, besides his revolver, a box of matches and a hunter's knife consisting of several blades and a little saw. Getting out his knife with some difficulty, he began to hack at the wickerwork. Dry and pliant, the interlaced rods did not long resist the saw's steel teeth. It took him a bare 10 minutes to make an opening, sufficiently large to push his head and shoulders through. The rest of his body followed easily. Such was his haste to be free, that he tore, not only his clothes, but his elbows and hands, on the jagged ends of the broken wickerwork. Large drops of blood fell on the flooring. "Bah! I got off cheaply!" cried Fandor, standing up to relax his cramped muscles, and stretching his aching legs and arms. "Unless I am jolly well mistaken, I am lord of all I survey. I am alone in my glory. There's not a soul in the place. Good luck indeed!" He turned for a last look at his broken prison house, the cage in which he had spent such exciting hours. He suddenly stiffened and drew back. A nervous trembling seized him. The nervous trembling due to sudden shock. Between the trunk, which had been dumped down in the centre of a large square room, without a scrap of furniture in it, and the window, through whose shutters the rays of morning sunshine shone, Fandor had caught sight of a body lying on the floor. A man's body. Fandor leapt forward. Was this same cunning criminal feigning sleep for some evil purpose? Standing over that motionless figure, Fandor bent and touched one of the man's hands. It was ice cold and rigid. The man was dead. To see his face was imperative. It was turned towards the floor. With difficulty Fandor raised the head and shoulders, for they were unusually large and strongly built. Fandor glanced at the face, and suddenly withdrew his hand. The corpse fell back on the floor with a thud. "Thomery!" murmured Fandor. "Why, it's Thomery!" It was the well known sugar refiner's body. The face was purple, the tongue protruding. Round his neck was tied a tricoloured scarf, the scarf of a police inspector. Was this the murderer's ironic touch? Fandor sank down quite overcome. He tried to collect his thoughts. "A disgusting joke, this! If someone should take into his head to enter the room at this moment, what kind of explanation could I give? Here I am, alone with the dead body of a man I know, and in a room I don't know, in a neighbourhood whose whereabouts I know no more than the man in the moon. Where am I? In whose house? For what purpose? Have those beauties of last night no suspicion of the truth? Did they leave me in this lair of theirs, of set purpose, knowing I was cooped up inside the trunk?" Just then, Fandor felt a slight moisture on the palm of his hand. It was all red. The scratches made by the jagged edges of the wickerwork were still bleeding. "Better and better, I declare," murmured Fandor. "If I don't look like a little holy Saint John, a corpse and a man with blood on his hands seated beside the dead body of this murdered man, nothing more is required to jail me with all the power of the law. To go to prison under such suspicious circumstances is serious. The police, who are floundering about in a maze of investigations without any result so far, will be only too delighted to kill two birds with one stone, to suppress a journalist and discover a criminal. I have got to get out of here, that is plain as a pikestaff. Get away? Yes, but with the honour of war. I must establish an alibi, that is absolutely necessary. I like to think that my false police inspector and his accomplice have cut and run for some time. At any rate, that they will be in no hurry to come back to see what is happening where they have so neatly and nicely left the corpse of this Thomery. What part did this fellow play in the drama? Criminal or victim? Fandor had reached the door of the hall opening on to the main staircase. He was listening. He had explored the flat. It was empty. He had found water in the kitchen, had washed his face and removed every trace of blood from his person. It was a flat suitable for a middle class household. There were 3 large rooms, decorated with a certain amount of luxury. Fandor looked at his watch. It was 7 o'clock. He stood listening. Someone, a man, was coming downstairs. Someone, a woman, was coming up. They met on the landing just outside. "Monsieur Mercadier, here are your letters. I was bringing them up to you." "It was hardly worth while, my good lady. I have come down, you see, so you can save yourself 5 flights of stairs." "Oh no, monsieur. I have to come up to go down my stairs." Monsieur Mercadier continued to descend, and the portress continued to mount. Fandor's heart beat faster when he realised that she was approaching the door. Would she come in and find him there? Had the new tenants left a key of the flat with her? No, the portress dusted the landing quickly and continued her ascent. He heard her going up and up. He made up his mind to slip out onto the landing. Despite his efforts, he could not prevent his shoes creaking. It was springtime, and already the stair carpet had been taken up. He was on the point of going downstairs, when he heard the portress calling from above. "Who's there? What do you want?" Had she heard him leave the flat? Was he to be stupidly caught just as he was escaping? He must act at once. He went up a step or 2 of the next flight of stairs, and called out: "Is Monsieur Mercadier at home?" "Ah no, monsieur. He has just this minute gone out. I am surprised you did not meet him." "Very good, madame. I will come another time." Fandor turned on his heel, and, whistling with hands in his pockets, he gained the ground floor, passed the entrance gate, and found himself in the street. He mingled with the passers by, and learned from the first plaque he came to with the name of the street on it that he was in rue Lecourbe, Vaugirard. End of Chapter 19. Read by Don W. Jenkins. Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybart.blogspot.com. Section 20 of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 20. Under the Hooded Mask. What had happened? By way of what mysterious adventures had the corpse of sugar refiner Thomery reached that empty room in rue Lecourbe, where Jérôme Fandor had come across it? 2 days previous, on the afternoon of Elizabeth Dollon's arrest, Monsieur Thomery was working in his study, when a servant came to tell him that a lady wished to speak to him. "Did she give you her name?" asked Thomery.
"No, monsieur, this person said her name would tell you nothing, but she was sure monsieur would see her, for she would only detain him a minute or two."
Piles of papers were stacked on the great sugar refiner's study table. Typists were laying numerous letters before him, which awaited his signature. Thomery thought to himself: "I have still a good half hour's work before me. Deuce take this importunate visitor!" He was on the point of saying he could not see anyone, when the servant added:
"This person declares she comes with reference to Madame the Princess Danidoff."
Though he was a man of business, Thomery was a gallant man also, and very much in love. His approaching marriage with the Princess, which had been kept secret, was now known. The name of Princess Danidoff settled the question. "Very well, let her come in." The manservant disappeared a minute, then ushered into the study a very unassuming woman of uncertain age and quite ordinary looking. Thomery rose to meet her, pointing pleasantly to one of the large arm chairs in the room. The visitor was profusely apologetic.
"I am so exceedingly sorry, Monsieur Thomery, to disturb you at such an hour, when you must certainly have a great deal to occupy your attention, but the matter I have come about will not wait, and I am sure it will interest you."
This little person seemed very intelligent, and Thomery was favourably impressed by her manner, which was both simple and decided. "Madame, I am listening to you. In what way can I be of service to you?"
"I am not here, monsieur," she protested, "to pester you with any wants and wishes for myself. I am a diamond broker, and..." She had not finished her sentence when Thomery, smiling but firm, rose and said sharply: "In that case, madame, I guess the motive of your call." "But, monsieur..."
"Yes, that is so. Ever since my approaching marriage has been announced, I have received every day a dozen visits from jewellers, goldsmiths, upholsterers, and so on. I regret to have to tell you that you will not be able to persuade me to buy, that my betrothed has received so many wedding presents that there is no room for more. I do not require one single thing." Although Thomery had spoken in a tone which did not admit of any reply, although he had risen the better to mark his intention of cutting short the call, the diamond broker had remained seated, leaning back in her arm chair. She gave no sign of being ready to go away. "Consequently, madame," continued Thomery. His visitor laughed.
"Monsieur, you have very quickly made up your mind that I have nothing interesting to offer you. I have not come to offer you ordinary jewels."
It was Thomery's turn to smile slightly. "I quite understand, madame, that you should think your merchandise exceptional, but once more..." The broker interrupted the sugar refiner with a movement of her hand.
"Do listen to me a moment, monsieur. Though I am a diamond broker, diamonds are not what I have come to ask you to purchase. It is a question of something quite different."
She paused deliberately. Thomery gazed at her without saying a word.
"You know, monsieur," continued the broker, "that in such a business as mine one is obliged to see a great many jewellers every day. Well, in the course of my peregrinations, I found at a jeweller's, you must allow me to withhold his name, some pearls which I am certain you will find are a wonderful bargain."
"For the last time, madame, I do not want a wonderful bargain." The agent smiled curiously.
"There are some things which simply do not allow themselves to be refused," she declared.
She now drew from her pocket a little jewel case, and, notwithstanding Thomery's unconcealed impatience, opened it, and selected 2 pearls which she held out to him.
"Do examine these jewels. You are going to tell me that they are perfectly beautiful, are you not, Monsieur Thomery?"
The diamond broker offered them so naturally that Thomery gave way. He examined the pearls. He was a connoisseur. "In truth, madame, these pearls are superb. Unfortunately, I am not enough of an expert to buy them without taking competent advice. That is, if I thought of acquiring them eventually. But I repeat, I have no wish to acquire such things." Deuce take it, thought Thomery, this broker won't take no for an answer. Since I cannot rid myself of her by being pleasant, I shall make myself disagreeable. But the would-be seller still insisted.
Monsieur, you really cannot be a connoisseur, otherwise I am sure you would not return these pearls to me."
"But, madame..."
"And I am convinced that if Princess Sonia Danidoff had had them in her hand instead of you, she would have been greatly taken with them."
The broker had emphasized her words so strangely that suddenly Thomery hesitated. What did this mysterious visitor mean? What was it she considered so extraordinary about the jewels she had just submitted to him? A suspicion crossed his mind. "Whence come these pearls, madame?" But at this question the broker got up.
"Monsieur Thomery," declared she, "I should be very vexed with myself were I to make you lose your evening. Your time is precious. Besides, in order to give you a proper answer to your question, I should have to make certain of facts I now only guess at. Still, I think that without having told you anything definite, I have made you sufficiently understand what is in my mind. You will not now doubt the interest that the Princess Sonia Danidoff would have, were she able to examine these jewels."
"Is that so?"
"Consequently, Monsieur Thomery, I am going to ask if you will kindly show these pearls to the Princess, and then if you will be good enough to let me know what decision you come to jointly with her. If you were a buyer, I fancy I might let you have these jewels on quite exceptional terms."
Thomery visibly hesitated. He was looking at the pearls, which he was still holding in his hand, and he thought: "One might swear that these are two of the pearls stolen from Sonia at my ball." Thomery did not reply at once. The broker was looking at him with a smile. She seemed to guess his thoughts. Thomery, on his side, was examining the woman. "Is she simply a police informer?" he asked himself. "One of these women who are apparently dealers, but are really in the pay of the police, and frequent jewellers for the purpose of tracing stolen jewels?" He was on the verge of asking her who she was, but he refrained. If this woman had not presented herself under her true colours, evidently she wished to pass for an ordinary dealer. It was possible that she was really a receiver of stolen goods. Thomery came to a decision. "I shall have the privilege of seeing the Princess Danidoff to morrow afternoon. Will you, therefore, leave the pearls with me? I will show them to her. Should she express the slightest wish to possess them, I might possibly come to terms with you." "Dearest, it is sweet of you to make no objection to the way in which I obtained this jewel for you to see, and to choose for your own, if you will. The correct thing would have been to ask you to accompany me to some well known jeweller, instead of which, I frankly confess that these pearls were offered to me on very advantageous terms. If they please you, it will give me the greatest pleasure to see them adorning your graceful neck."
Princess Sonia laughed. "My dear, for heaven's sake, don't worry about such things as that. A pearl is not less beautiful because it comes from some unpretentious jeweller's shop. I am too fond of jewels for their own sake, to trouble about the casket that enshrines them."
Thomery bowed, well pleased. "Here then, dear Sonia, are the two pearls entrusted to me as samples. Please, dearest, examine them carefully, very carefully. And if you like them, tell me so frankly." The Princess took the two pearls from the betrothed, and, crossing the great drawing room, she approached one of the bay windows, lifting the thin hangings that she might the better examine the pearls.
"They are marvellous!" she cried.
"Dear Sonia, you think these gems rarely beautiful?"
"Indeed I do. Their lustre is superb, their quality, their shape, perfect. Why, my dear, these are the most splendid pearls I have ever seen, with one exception. The only pearls to equal them are those that were stolen from me. The loss of them has been a bitter grief. They came to me, you know, from my dear mother. I never thought to find pearls of such quality again."
"You consider these to be of as pure a quality then, dear?" Sonia Danidoff continued to examine the two pearls.
"It is really extraordinary!" she cried suddenly. "Do you know, my dear, there are certain peculiarities about their lustre. Yes, I could swear that these very pearls you are offering me are two of those stolen from me."
Thomery appeared to have been impatiently awaiting these very words. "You really truly believe, Sonia, that they resemble the pearls stolen from you that unlucky evening?"
"I repeat, they are identical."
Thomery looked smilingly at Sonia. "I have all sorts of reasons for supposing that they really are two of your own pearls you are now holding in your hand." And then and there, Thomery told his fiancée all about the strange visit he had received the evening before, as well as his hope that he would be able to recover the stolen triple collar in its entirety. "That intriguing dealer," said he finally, "must be a police informer. In any case, I am persuaded that, before long, she will take me to some receiver or other who is in possession of your pearl collar."
"Oh, tell me you are not going among such people all alone!" cried Sonia, with a note of sharp anxiety in her voice.
"But why not?"
"If they are, as you think, thieves?"
"Well?"
"Well, don't you see, my dear, that if you go to buy the pearls, they will count on your bringing a large sum of money with you? Why, it would be a most imprudent thing to do."
Thomery shrugged his shoulders. "Really, that's nonsense, Sonia. If these assassins meant to set a trap for me, they have 1,000 other means of doing so. Besides, it would be remarkably daring of them to advise me to show you these pearls, and draw my attention to the question of their being stolen ones. No, Sonia, this dealer is not the emissary of a band of robbers and assassins. She is a police informer, who has taken precautions. I run no dangerous risks by accompanying her. Reassure yourself on that point." But Sonia Danidoff was not reassured by Thomery's arguments.
"All that only frightens me," said she. "If you do not really think you are running any risk, will you let me go with you? My dear, we will go together to identify those pearls, will we not?"
Thomery rose to take his leave, laughing and protesting. "Why, dear Sonia, it would be in the highest degree improper on my part, were I to agree to such a proposition. One of two things: either there is no danger, and I should be very sorry that I had let you go out in such shocking weather; or, if there is danger, I should be still more distressed were I to drag you into it with me. I do beg of you, Sonia, do not insist on it. I am not a child, and I will be very careful, very wary." Shortly after this, Thomery took leave of Sonia Danidoff. He went straight to the Café de la Paix, where he had arranged to meet the diamond broker. She was punctual. She greeted Thomery with her most winning smile.
"I am persuaded, monsieur, that Madame Sonia Danidoff was interested by the offer you made her."
"Quite so," replied Thomery. "Should we go to your jeweller's without further loss of time?"
"If you really wish to do so, monsieur, indeed it would be the best thing to do."
Thomery hailed a cab. He and the diamond agent entered it together, and she gave the driver an address. 20 minutes later, they left the cab and were standing before the house where the present possessor of the pearls was to be found. Thomery knew no more about the person he had come to interview than he did when he started; that is to say, practically nothing. The diamond broker had cleverly evaded giving any direct answers to the sugar refiner's questions. She had confined herself to stating what would be the probable price demanded for the pearl collar, which question interested Thomery least of all. They mounted, in single file, a rather poor sort of staircase. On the second floor the woman stopped. A narrow door faced them. The woman rang. They waited.
"Someone is coming," said the woman. "I hear footsteps."
The door was opened half way.
"Who is it?"
asked a man's voice.
"My dear friend," answered the woman.
The door opened wide. The same voice said:
"Come in, monsieur."
Thomery had barely stepped inside the room when the diamond broker, who was close behind, flung a long silk scarf around his neck, and pushing his knee into his victim's back for a support, he attempted to give, with Herculean force, the famous stroke of Father Francis Vigezou. Energetic, Thomery did not lose his presence of mind. He knew that to resist such a pull by simple force was impossible. Quickly he threw himself backwards, thus giving to the strangling pull, and falling on top of the woman, who had played this dastardly trick on him. From his constricted throat came a hoarse "Ah!" like a death rattle. As he was falling, for one flashing second it seemed as though he were going to escape from the vice which was crushing in his throat. Then, out of the shadow, there had appeared the fantastic vision of a man in a tight-fitting sort of black jersey, which covered him from head to foot. His face was concealed by a hooded mask. This man leapt out of the shadow. He held a dagger in his hand. Before Thomery had time to make a movement, the masked man had pierced his chest with a single stroke. The sugar refiner was naught but a convulsive corpse. "Ah, well," declared the so-called diamond broker, who had got to his feet and was kicking Thomery's body aside. "Ah, well, he is a dead weight, this fellow. By Jove, master, I fancied he was going to crush me, and that I should have to let him free. You did well to come to the rescue," the masked man remarked in an indifferent tone. "It really does not matter in the slightest. Tell me, does anyone suspect?"
"No one, master. He came like a sheep to the slaughter."
"Princess Danidoff?"
"As for her, she must be waiting for the return of her beloved friend. I do not advise you to pay her a visit."
"Be silent, chatterbox," ordered the masked assassin sharply. "Get rid of your clothes. We must hurry. We have work to do."
"This evening?"
"This evening." And whilst the diamond broker rid himself rapidly of skirt and bodice, and regained his masculine appearance, for this diamond broker was a man, the masked assassin added: "Nibet, you have played your part perfectly, and I will pay you to morrow the sum we agreed on. But I repeat, we have work before us this evening, so be quick." There was a short silence. Then the bandit asked: "You have arranged to put among this fool's papers the rent receipts which will enable the police to find this flat?"
"Yes, master."
"Good. Now all we have to do is to get away from this room, which we shall not see again until this evening at any rate." End of Chapter 20. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Section 21 of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 21. In a Prison Van. In one of the rooms reserved for readers of La Capitale, Jérôme Fandor was gravely listening to Madame Barrat's account of what had occurred at her boarding house during the night. She had rushed off to tell him and to ask his advice. "What you tell me, madame, is truly extraordinary," said Fandor, with an air of profound astonishment. "How did you discover that the police inspector who seized the trunk and carried it away was not a genuine policeman?" "Why, through the arrival of Monsieur Xavier, the police inspector of our district. I know him. There was no mistaking who and what he was; and when I told him that the trunk had been carried off the preceding evening, rather in the dead of night, he guessed everything." "And what did he say?" "Oh, he made us all come to the police station, and I can assure you that he looked far from pleased." "You must admit, dear madame, that his annoyance was not without reason. The police were made fine fools of in this affair. But afterwards, whom did he take back with him to the police station?" "He took me and my manservant." "And when you got to the police station?" "Well, Monsieur Fandor, when we reached the police station, he made us come into his office, and there he put us through a regular examination, just as though he suspected us." "But there must have been an accomplice in your house who let the robbers in," said Fandor. "I do not suppose the false police inspector forced the door open." "Ah, but Monsieur Fandor, here is something I do not understand, nor does anybody else. No, they did not try to hide themselves, not the least in the world. They rang the bell, they asked to see me, they told me what they had come for, and, accompanied by my manservant, carried away the trunk, and had it put in the cab, all in the most open and barefaced manner." "It was your manservant who accompanied them?" "But most certainly. And that very fact turned against Jules in a very nasty manner. Poor Jules! Just imagine, the police inspector finished by ordering my house to be thoroughly searched from top to bottom. And when the policemen returned, without a why or wherefore, they took Jules away to another part of the police station." "I say! I say!" "Oh, it was all explained. As soon as Jules had gone, the police inspector told me they had found keys in his rooms, keys which could be made to fit any kind of lock whatever. Monsieur Xavier was convinced that my poor Jules was a burglar. Imagine it!" "And you yourself, madame, are convinced of the contrary?" "Oh, assuredly! Why, I have known Jules a very long time, and in many little ways, on many occasions, he has shown himself to be strictly honest." "But those false keys?" "Those false keys, Monsieur Fandor, why, I myself made Jules buy them, hoping to find among them one that would open my coach house." "So that?" "So that, Monsieur Fandor, the police inspector was obliged to agree with me that Jules was honest." "And he released this servant of yours?" asked Fandor. His tone expressed annoyance.
"No, and that is why I am so distressed. He said that provisionally at least my servant Jules was to be considered as under arrest. What ought to be done to get him let out?" "But, madame, he will be set free to morrow, you may be certain of it." "No doubt he will. All the same, there is my house turned upside down, and I need Jules to help me to night. I really do not know what I shall do without him. Poor fellow! I simply cannot imagine how it is they suspect him." Fandor said, with mock gravity: "Ah, madame, justice is sometimes so stupid, so wrong headed!... Look here now, would you like a bit of good advice? Telephone to Messieurs Barbey Nanteuil. They are well known and powerful. Perhaps they would exert their influence in your servant's favour? He might be set free this evening. I, you see, am but a journalist, and without a scrap of influence." Madame Bourrat thought this a good idea. Fandor rang for an attendant. "Take madame to the telephone." Left to himself, the reporter could not help rubbing his hands. "I must get rid of this excellent woman, who is certainly the most foolish person it has ever been my lot to meet. Good hearing! That servant of hers is under lock and key. Things are going in the right direction, but they are not going well for me. If he confesses to morrow, when he is had up for examination, then the police will have the information before me. Then, too, they are such duffers, such bunglers, that they are quite capable of giving that Jules his liberty. What the deuce must I do to prevent his being let loose, and how am I to stop the judicial interrogation? What a dog's life a journalist's is!" Madame Bourrat reappeared. "Monsieur Nanteuil is not there," she said, "but I got into communication with Monsieur Barbey. He advised me to wait till to morrow. He said it was too late in the day to do anything." "But will he not intervene to morrow?" "I don't know. To tell the truth, I am sure Monsieur Barbey thought it very inconsiderate of me to disturb him about a matter in which he takes not the slightest interest." "That's a fact. What possible interest can the bankers take in such a matter? My advice was absurd." Fandor rose. As he was seeing his visitor out, he said: "In any case, dear madame, count on me to morrow morning. I shall call at your house about 11. If there is anything fresh, we can talk it over." "Oh, here's Janson de Sailly College! Oh, what detestable remembrances you conjure up! But this won't do. Go it, my boy, I must play the part." The plumber, who had just given utterance to these remarks, glanced sharply about him. When he had made sure that there was no one close on his heels, he stepped into the roadway, and started on a zigzag course which seemed likely to upset his balance. Crossing the avenue Henri Martin, going straight towards the town hall at the corner of the rue de la Pompe, the good plumber, who was staggering more than a little, began to stutter and stammer in a drunken voice: "It is the final struggle!" The passers by looked around. "They sing the Internationale in the streets now, it seems," remarked a severe looking gentleman. The workman turned to this correct personage. "What of it? Don't you think it a jolly fine thing, then?" In a thick voice he continued to sing: "Let us gather, and on the morrow." The severe and correct personage spoke: "My friend, you would do better to hold your tongue. You forget that there is a police station close by." But the incorrigible plumber caught the correct personage by his coat tails. "If I sing the Internationale, it's because I'm a free man, ain't I? A free man can sing if he likes, can't he? Eh? Why don't you sing then? Eh?" The correct personage drew himself up stiffly, tried to push the obnoxious plumber away. The workman had now reached that stage of drunkenness when discussions tend to become interminable. The gentleman pushed the drunken man aside, saying: "Come, come, go away, leave me alone!" But the maudlin plumber was attracting the attention of the passers by his gestures. He addressed the world at large: "Would you believe it, that fellow there don't want me to sing? No? Well, I'm going to!" And he started triumphantly: "It is the final struggle!" The policeman came out of the station with a solemn air. He put his hand on the tipsy plumber's shoulder in a paternal fashion: "Go along with you, my friend! Come now, pass along, pass along!" But he could not make the plumber budge before he had finished his verse, any more than he could teach him to walk straight on the spur of the moment. Leaving hold of the gentleman's coat tails, the worthy plumber seized the policeman's arm.
Oh, you're a brother. I have education, I have. You're a workman too, I know." As the police inspector pushed him off, trying to make him go on his way, the plumber put his arm round him. "No, no, show you're a workman. Sing with me. It is the final..." The scandal could no longer be tolerated. Street corner idlers were gathering. People were laughing at the policeman. Strong measures were necessary. "Come now," said the policeman. "Yes or no, will you be off and go home, eh? Or shall I take you to the station?" "You take me? You take me? Why, it would take four of you to take me." There was no shilly-shallying after this. Wounded in his vanity, the servant of the law did not hesitate. "All right," said he, and seizing the plumber by the collar, although there was no attempt at resistance, he dragged his prisoner towards the town hall of the district, for the police station was there also. "Some more game for the Dépôt," said the policeman as he passed the guard. "A fellow I can't get rid of. Are the cells full up?" Other policemen came up. An arrest in a peaceful district gives interest to the dull routine of the men on duty.
"The cell's full? Go along with you. There's only a small shopkeeper who had no papers."
Thereupon the unfortunate singer, who continued to stagger about, was quickly pushed into the dark room called the detention room. An ordinary everyday incident of the streets, this arrest of a drunkard. "I shall have to write out a report for this fellow," said the policeman who had arrested the songster. "And the Salad Basket (10) prison van passes in an hour's time. I shall just do it." "Have you anyone for the Dépôt to day?" asked the driver from his high seat on the prison van. He was on a collecting journey, as is usual every evening, when the Salad Baskets, as they are vulgarly called, pass to the various police stations of Paris to pick up the individuals arrested during the day. "Two of 'em," answered the police sergeant on duty. Whilst official papers were being interchanged and forms were being filled in according to rule, policemen went to the cells to bring out the two prisoners to be dispatched to the Dépôt. The first to pass out was the costermonger. He was straightway put into one of the narrow compartments in the Salad Basket. Then it was the turn of the tipsy and obstreperous workman, who was now silent, moody, and apparently sober. "Up it now!" cried the policeman. "Come along with you, you miserable drunk! March now! Foot it!" As the drunk hit against the partition of the narrow passageway running up the middle of the Salad Basket, the policeman, with a shove, pushed him into one of the compartments, carefully shutting the little door on him and fastening it. "My word!" he exclaimed, "that fellow wouldn't have been capable of walking 3 steps in an hour's time!" As the driver climbed to his seat on the van, the policeman called out, with a laugh: "You have a traveller inside who doesn't detest wine. It's a pity to see a man in such a hoggish state." The same policeman would have been surprised, could he have seen the bibulous one's face when the Salad Basket cast loose from her moorings, and started off in the direction of the Pont du Jour police station, the last one on the round to be visited. The drunk, whom one push had sufficed to plant on his seat, had briskly drawn himself upright, and was smiling broadly, a wide, noiseless smile. "What a joke! And what a jolly good actor I should have made!" thought Jérôme Fandor, giving himself a mental hug of satisfaction. "Ah, they arrest the individuals I want to set talking. The police imagine they are going to push in first and find out the answer to the riddle. We shall see." Fandor was listening intensely, and trying to discover from the movements of the Salad Basket what street they were passing along. "Smooth going. Evidently we are still on the rue de la Pompe, so I have about a quarter of an hour more of it." Fandor examined the tiny cell in which he had been imprisoned of his own free will. "Not much to be said for it," ran his thoughts. "There is scarcely room to sit. Impossible to stand up or turn around. Nearly dark, and precious little air comes in through those wooden shutters. I shouldn't think there ever had been an escape from these vans." Fandor smiled broadly. "Even if I don't succeed, it is worth while making the attempt. But I shall succeed. See if I don't. I settled it in my mind that I was to leave the cells after this costermonger. He is in front of me. Therefore the cell behind me is empty. It will be deucedly queer if at Auteuil police station they don't put that confounded Jules in it, whom I intend to interview under the nose of the police. I shall start talking to him by tapping on the partition in prisoner's language.
The fellow is pretty sure to be an old offender, so he will know the system. If he doesn't, when we get to the Dépôt I will push up to him somehow and get a few words with him. If the Dépôt is full, we shall be stuck into the common cell until morning. So I take it as certain that my interview with this true and faithful servant will come off, and I shall get to know a good deal about the mystery." As an afterthought, it occurred to Fandor that probably there had never been such a light-hearted occupant of this cell as he. "Ah, that's the sound of the trams! One jolt, two jolts! Good! The rails! We are crossing the rue Mozart. We are going faster. In 5 minutes we shall be at the Auteuil police station, and there we can start our little operations." There was one thing that attracted Fandor's attention which was keenly on the alert. There was a violent jolt, and he had a distinct impression that the vehicle turned to the right. "Why, where the deuce are they taking us?" Fandor asked himself. "To the boulevard Exelmans station? We had not reached the end of the rue Mozart, surely? Where did we turn then? Rue de Ranelagh? No, there is a channel stone at the entrance, and I should have felt it. Rue de l'Assomption? Again, no. The roadway is up. I should be knocked about more than this on my wooden seat. We are going over a perfectly kept road which cannot have much traffic. Why, of course, it is rue de Docteur Blanche. Isn't rue Mozart barred at the end? Yes, the driver must be going round by the boulevard Montmorency. Ah, well, I am in no hurry. There will be time enough for me to pay my respects to the illustrious Jules." Just as Fandor was thus congratulating himself, he was thrown against the side of his cell. The van seemed to have come into violent collision with some object, and had tilted over to a considerable extent. Muffled oaths came from neighbouring cells, a stifled exclamation reached Fandor's ears, then louder still came the intermittent humming and snorting of a motor car. "Confound you! Can't you pay attention to where you're going? Keep to your right!" Slightly stunned, Fandor heard someone knocking. A voice asked: "Are you hurt?" "No, but..." Already the questioner had moved away. "Evidently," thought Fandor, "the driver wants to know whether his human packages are damaged or not. We have collided with another vehicle. Cheerful!" Fandor's cell was now at such an angle that he could only suppose that the Salad Basket had had one of its wheels broken. "What a nuisance!" he murmured. "Before they have finished their palaver as to how the accident happened, and have repaired the damage, we shall have been here a full half hour. Jules will be in a temper." Minute succeeded minute, long interminable minutes, and Fandor could not hear clearly what was said, what was being done to put the Salad Basket on its legs again. The atmosphere of the little cell was becoming intolerable, for the movement of the vehicle had driven fresh air inside the shutter, and now that the Salad Basket was stationary, the air was becoming almost unbreathable. Fandor's nerves were on edge. "It cannot be that they are going to leave us stranded here," thought he. "Ah, now they have started repairs." Fandor noticed that his cell was gradually regaining its ordinary level. A lifting jack must have been slipped under the vehicle, for there was a melancholy creaking sound. They must be putting the wheel on again. "No," thought Fandor after some time had passed, "never would I have supposed that it could have taken so much time to repair a Salad Basket. Why, we shall soon have been stuck here for 2 mortal hours. I hope it won't make any difference to our going to the Dépôt, nor stop my getting into close touch with that villain Jules." There was a further period of waiting. Then our exasperated journalist heard the driver pass down the centre of the van. The van door slammed. Once more the Salad Basket was loosed from its moorings. "Something queer is going on," said Fandor suddenly. He felt certain that the van had turned completely round and was going in the direction it came from. "Now where in the world are we going? By what kind of a route are we making for that blessed police station?" There were spaces of asphalt, succeeded by wood pavement, then by hard stones, then asphalt and wood again, and turning succeeded turning, whilst a new Tom Thumb was doing his possible to guess the route the Salad Basket was taking. Presently Fandor gave it up. He had to admit that he was completely lost. Which way the Salad Basket was going he knew no more than the man in the moon. "We have been trotting along for more than half an hour. Therefore we cannot be going to the boulevard Exelmans police station. The distance from the rue de Docteur Blanche to the Point du Jour is not great. As Fandor was murmuring these words, the van slowed down, turned around, then with a bump and a jolt it mounted the footpath. "Now for it!" said Fandor. "This is certainly not the Pont de Jour station. We are passing under an archway. Now we are turning again. Ah, we draw up at last. Not too soon." The van did stop. Again a wait. Fandor cocked both ears. He wondered who was going to enter the cell next his. Then a man approached the door of his little cell where he was indeed cribbed, cabined and confined, inserted a key in the lock, opened and shouted in a brutal tone: "Out with you! March! Quick now!" Fandor had no choice but to obey the orders hurled at him; but no sooner had he descended the steps of the prison van than he exclaimed: "By Jove! The Dépôt!" This was not the moment to express all the surprise he felt at being landed at police headquarters in this fashion. All round the Salad Basket the police were ranged in irregular order. They shouted to him to be quick. "Come on, hurry with you! Hurry there!" Fandor, followed by the costermonger, was pushed towards a little open door in the grey wall which led into a kind of office where an old frowning man was already looking through the papers which had been respectfully handed to him by a warder. "So you have brought only 2 of the birds," remarked the frowning official. "Yes, superintendent." "Good, that will do." Turning to the warders, the frowning little superintendent ordered: "Take them away. Cell 14. Useless to rouse the whole place." Once more the warders pushed Fandor before them, as well as the poor costermonger. They were driven into a dark corridor, on to which a row of cells opened. The head warder opened a door. "In with you, my merry men! You will be put through your paces to morrow." As the door fell to with a resounding clang, Jérôme had inspected the place by the light of a lantern. "Empty! No luck! My plan has been spoiled. I shall not be able to interview Jules." Philosophically, Jérôme Fandor was preparing to go to sleep on the plank bed which decorated one end of the cell, when the little costermonger, roused from his torpid condition, began to moan and groan. "Oh, what a misfortune! To think I am innocent, innocent as an unborn babe! What's to be done? Oh, what's to be done?" The last thing Fandor wished to do was to start a conversation with his lamenting companion. He tapped the costermonger on the shoulder. "Good heavens, man, the best thing you can do is to go to sleep! Take my word for it!" Without puzzling his brains any further over the enigmas he wished to get to the bottom of, Fandor stretched himself on his plank bed and was soon sleeping the sleep of the innocent. Monsieur Fuselier looked perplexed. "You, Fandor, you arrested? But am I going mad?" Our journalist had been taken from his cell at 8 in the morning, and had been conducted to the office of the Public Prosecutor. Here the acting magistrate, in conformity with the law, wished to put him through the examination which would establish his identity. All arrested persons have to submit to this interrogation within 24 hours of their arrival at the Dépôt. Jérôme Fandor had given his name at once, and, in order to prove the truth of his statements, he had asked that Monsieur Fuselier should be sent for, so that the magistrate might vouch for his identity and say a word in his favour. Monsieur Fuselier had hastened to the Dépôt, had taken Fandor to his office, and had anxiously questioned him. Why, he asked, had the police been obliged to arrest him for drunkenness in the open thoroughfare? When Fandor had concluded his statement, the magistrate exclaimed: "Your ruse is inconceivable! I must compliment you highly on your ability and your detective gifts." "I wish I could agree with you," replied Fandor in a depressed tone. "In spite of everything, I have not got into communication with Jules. But, Monsieur Fuselier, have you interrogated him yet?" The magistrate shook his head. "Alas, my poor friend, you have no idea of the extraordinary events of the past night. Evidently, notwithstanding the fact that you played a passive part in them." "I played a part? Extraordinary events? What the deuce do you mean?" "I mean, dear Fandor, that all Paris is laughing over it. The police have been tricked. You have been tricked. Did you not tell me just now that your prison van had had an accident? Do you know what really happened?" "I ask you to tell me." "Your vehicle was run into by a motor car. The driver was extremely clumsy, or very capable." "What's that?" Fandor leaned forward, keen as a pointer on the scent. "It was like this," replied Monsieur Fuselier. "Your Salad Basket was very badly knocked about by the collision. The driver could not possibly repair it single handed. He telephoned to headquarters. Help was sent at once, and he had orders to drive to the dépôt as soon as he could. He was not to trouble about the Boulevard Exelmans station. That, for once, could be cleared the following morning. Unfortunately, the telephone messages and replies had taken up a certain amount of time. When they telephoned to the Boulevard Exelmans station from headquarters to warn them not to expect the injured Salad Basket, the dépôt man who was telephoning was extremely surprised to hear that the Salad Basket had already passed on to the Auteuil station and had taken away the arrested individuals there, notably this famous Jules. "I never calculated on this!" cried Fandor. "The truth is, my dear fellow, that Salad Basket of yours was not knocked out of action by an unlucky accident. The knockout was intentional, was carefully planned. It was done to stop your van from reaching the Auteuil station. While your basket was being repaired, another basket appeared at the Auteuil clearing station. This, if you please, had been stolen. It was standing before the Palais de Justice. Two accomplices took possession of it and drove away. The daring rascals were suitably disguised, of course. They produced false papers at Auteuil, got them endorsed, went through the regular forms, and carried off the men from the detention cells under the very nose and eyes of the superintendent himself." "What became of the stolen basket?" snapped Fandor. "It was found at dawn near the fortifications, and, need I say, empty?" "So that Jules has escaped?" "As you say." "And the car which intentionally knocked my Salad Basket out of action, whose was it?" Monsieur Fuselier smiled. "Oh, it's a queer affair! In fact, it may lead to the wind up of all the Dollon business. We may now get to the bottom of that series of crimes. You will never guess who is the owner of that car, Fandor." "No, I am no good at guessing riddles just now. Besides, I hate them." Fandor was nettled, exasperated. "We got the number of the car from a witness of the smash up, and we have verified its correctness. Well, my dear fellow, the owner of that car is Thomery." "Thomery!" gasped Fandor. "Yes, I have summoned him to appear before me. The summons has just been issued. Between you and me, I think Thomery is guilty. When he appears here, in, say, an hour from now, I shall issue a writ of arrest against this sugar refiner financier, and we don't know what else." But no sooner had Monsieur Fuselier finished his statement, a statement which he fully expected would strike his young reporter friend dumb with amazement, than Fandor threw himself back in his chair and roared with laughter. The magistrate was taken aback. "But what the devil do you find to laugh at in that?" Fandor had already checked his hilarity. "Oh, it is nothing. Only, Fuselier, I ask myself if really and truly Monsieur Thomery, who is a very big fellow, solidly built, has been able to discover a dodge, by means of which he can leave Jacques Dollon's imprints here, there, and everywhere." "But he does not leave Jacques Dollon's imprints because Dollon is living, because he came to see his sister. Why, you admitted that yourself!" "Why, of course, it's true. Jacques Dollon is alive. I had forgotten. Thomery can only be his accomplice, then," declared Fandor. And as Monsieur Fuselier stared at him, astonished at the way he had received the sensational news of the night, Fandor rose to take his leave. "My dear Fuselier, will you allow me to express my opinion?" Monsieur Fuselier nodded. "Well, I am sure that with regard to this affair there are more surprises in store for us. You have not got the answer to the riddle, not yet." With that, Fandor smiled and bowed and left the magistrate's room. He quitted the Palais, half smiling, half serious. What was he going to do next? End of Chapter 21. Read by Don W. Jenkins. Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Section 22 of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 22. An Execution. "Not much water about, is there?" "That's so, old 'un. If I'd known, it's boats I'd have taken to."
"Bah! Your shoes are big enough. That's not saying it's weather for a Christian to be out in."
"Don't grumble, old 'un. The more it comes down cats and dogs, the fewer stumps will be stirring outdoors. But a comrade or two will be on the prowl, eh?"
"Righto, old bird. Keep a lookout. Sure he'll come this way?"
"You bet your nut he will. He got my bit of scrawl this morning."
"What then?"
Shut up. Shut up. Folks coming." The night was inky black. Rain fell with sudden violence, threshed and driven by icy gusts of wind. The hour was late, the rue Raffet deserted save for the two men who had ventured out into the tempestuous darkness. They advanced with difficulty, side by side, speaking low. Rough customers to deal with. Their faces were emaciated from excessive drinking. Their eyes gleamed, their voices were hoarse, a brutal pair. But their movements were supple and lively, they walked with that ungainly swagger affected by the light-fingered gentry and the criminals of the underground world of Paris.
"And what did you say in your scrawl?"
"Oh, meddlers, take-ins, you know. I didn't put my fist into it, though."
"Who then?"
"You ask that?"
"I'm no wizard. If it wasn't your fist, whose then?"
"My woman."
"Ernestine?"
"Yes, Ernestine." They struggled on through the squally darkness. Then one of the two broke the silence.
"You're not jealous, Beadle, making your girl write letters to such folk?"
That sinister hooligan, the Beadle, burst out laughing. "Jealous? Me? Jealous of Ernestine? You make me laugh, you really do, old Beard." But Beard did not share his companion's mirth. He leaned against the palisade to take breath, while a little sheltered from the fierce onslaughts of the wind.
"I'll tell you what," he said in a gruff and threatening voice, "I don't like such dodges like those of this evening."
"Why so, monsieur?"
"Because, after all, it's a comrade."
"But he's betrayed. A traitor he is."
"But what do we know about it?"
The Beadle nodded, reflected. "What does anyone know about it?" he said at last. "Why, when the comrades told us, weren't they surprised, one and all? Nibet, Toulouche, even Mimile? They didn't hesitate, not one of them." "Well then, old 'un, as all the pals were of one mind, why hesitate? What's the use of discussing? But between you and me, I don't relish it either. It bothers me to go for a pal." Just then the tempest redoubled its fury. It seemed to the cowering men as though all the devils of the storm were galloping down the wind. Somewhere there was a moon, for scurrying clouds were dancing a witch's saraband across a faintly clearer sky. The unseen moon was mastering the obscurity of this midnight hour. By now the two sinister beings were nearing the rue du Docteur Blanche. They were passing a garden, in which tall poplars, caught by the squall, took fantastic shapes. They were nightmare trees, terrifyingly strange. "No more to be said," remarked the Beadle. "The scene is set. Where is the meeting place?"
100 yards from there, a little before the corner of the boulevard Montmorency."
"Good. And the trap?"
"It waits for us a little further off."
"Who's aboard it?"
"Mimile."
"That's good." The two men were now halfway along rue Raffet. The watch had begun. Gripped by the cold, they waited in silence. The minutes passed slowly, slowly in the deserted street. The Beard put his hand on the Beadle's shoulder. A vague sound could be heard in the distance, the steps could be distinguished. Some pedestrian was coming up the rue Raffet in their direction. "It is he," whispered the Beadle.
"It is he," affirmed the Beard. "He's not over steady on his feet."
"Perhaps he's ill-shod." The two spoke low and in a jesting tone. It relieved the painful tension of the moment. A comrade was marching to meet his death, and theirs the hands to deal that death, but not yet. It was a reaction against their sense of the looming tragedy of this dark hour. Now a man's advancing figure could be discerned. He came nearer. He was plainly, by the cut of his garments, an indoor servant. The collar of his coat was turned up. He had his hands in his pockets. He walked fast.
"Hey, you down there, the gang!" cried
the Beard, hailing the oncoming figure.
"Ah, it's you?" "Yes, it's me, comrade." "And you too, Beadle?"
"As you say."
"What do you want of me?" Since my arrest and escape from the Salad Basket, I'm not anxious to stroll about this neighbourhood. Out with it!"
The Beard said in a joking tone:
"You don't suspect, then? Speak out, Jules!"
Jules, for it was indeed he, shook his head.
"My word, I have no idea what you want. Who wrote to me this morning? Ernestine?"
Neither the Beadle nor Beard replied. The three men stood talking in the deserted street, bending their heads and backs under the rain, which was now pouring harder than ever.
"Come on, then, make haste," said Jules. "Come now, tell me what's the point? What's up? Spit it out, comrades. I don't want to be soaked to the skin, you know."
The Beadle forced the pace. He lifted his great, hairy, sinewy hand, brought it down heavily on Jules' shoulder, and in a changed voice, harsh, rough, imperative, he commanded: "You must follow us." Already he had his man fast. The unsuspicious Jules did not grasp the situation in the least.
"Follow you?" he asked. "As to that, certainly not. No more walking for me in such weather. Wait for us any day, say I. But whatever is the matter with you, eh? What? Why are you sticking out your jaws at me like this? Out with it, my lambs! Where am I to follow you? You won't say, Messieurs Beadle and Beard? You won't say?"
Beard moved a step and got behind Jules unnoticed. He repeated in the same tone, harsh, threatening:
"You've got to follow us, I tell you!"
Instinctively, Jules tried to turn around. The Beadle's strong grip kept him motionless. Then he understood. He was afraid.
"What's come to you?"
he cried in a trembling voice. The Beadle cut him short. "Enough! You will follow us? Yes or no?" Jules was going to say no, but he had not the time. Quick as lightning, the Beadle flung a long scarf round his neck, stuck his knee into his victim's back, and pulled. Jules uttered a faint groan, but half stifled, nearly strangled, he had not the strength to attempt the slightest self-defence. Directly he was flung backwards on the ground, where he measured his length and lay nearly stunned, Beard jumped on him, knelt on his chest and pinioned him. Jules lay motionless. The Beard now began tying up the legs of their victim.
"Pass me a scarf."
"There it is, old 'un."
"Very good. I'm going to apply a be discreet."
The be discreet of the Beard was a gag, which he rolled round the servant's head in expert fashion.
"Feet firm?"
asked the Beard. "Oh, jolly fine," said the Beadle. He turned his man over as though he were a bale of goods. Then he tied his victim's hands behind his back. "Is it far to go to the jaunting car?"
"No, for 2 sous, that's it."
A motor car was indeed coming slowly and noiselessly along rue Raffet. It was a sumptuous car.
"And if it is not he?"
"Stick him up against the bank. Dark as it is, there's every chance he won't be seen." Rapidly the doughty two stuck Jules against the bank at the side of the road. The unfortunate creature had fainted. Then they took out their cigarettes, and going a few steps away, they pretended to be sheltering themselves in order to strike a light. They need not have taken this precaution. The car stopped in front of them. The familiar voice of Mimile was heard. "Got the rabbit, then?"
"Yes, old 'un."
"Pitch it into the balloon, then." "The balloon?" questioned the Beadle. "Whatever's that?" Emilet laughed.
"At times, my brothers, your ignorance, mechanically speaking, is crass. The balloon is the back part of my car, I'd have you know."
The Beard sniggered.
"Good. Pick it up now, Beadle."
The two seized the body of Jules by shoulders and feet, and flung it brutally into the limousine. A rug, negligently flung over the body of the trussed Jules, hid him from observation. "Now we'll embark," announced Emilet. As a precaution, the young hooligan asked: "The bloke snores?" "Yes," replied the Beadle. "He is travelling in no nightmare land." The Beadle laughed. But Emilet was alarmed.
"You haven't snuffed him out, have you?"
"No danger of it. He's only shamming." "Off then," said Emilet. They rolled away at top speed. The bandits' lair had been well chosen by their chiefs. It was a vast cellar, with a vaulted roof, and earthen walls bedewed with an icy humidity. Axes, mattocks, shovels, rakes, and watering cans lay scattered on the ground. These were worn out tools; they had not served their purpose for many a day. The lantern, a kind of cresset protected by a wire globe, was suspended from the roof by a string. It shed a faint and wavering light, creating weird shadows in that far stretching space, too vast for the insufficient illumination. Directly beneath the cresset lantern, inside the circle of light it threw upon the ground, a fantastic group of human creatures, pressed close to one another, drinking, shouting, chattering, singing. A clean-shaven man, whose suspicious little eyes were perpetually blinking, turned to a young woman. "Look here, Ernestine, my beauty, are you certain the Beadle understood that we should be waiting for him here?" Big Ernestine, who was crouching on the ground and warming her hands at a wood fire, throwing up clouds of smoke, shrugged her shoulders.
"Stop it, do! You say things over and over again, like a clock, Nibet. Since I've told you, yes, yes, it is. There now, and be hanged to you! You don't by chance fancy the Beadle has been made a mouthful of, do you?"
Roars of laughter greeted this. Nibet was not one of the inner circle. He was not much of a favourite in the band of Numbers. It is true that they reckoned him a comrade, useful, faithful, that they felt safe with him; but they bore him a grudge because of his regular employment, because of his position, because he was an official; and, first and last, his warder's uniform impressed the jail birds unpleasantly. But Nibet was not the man to allow himself to be intimidated. "All the same," said he, "I ask where the three of them have got to. If they know the mushroom bed, they should have been back long ago." He shouted to an old woman: "Eh, Toulouche, tell us the time." But Mother Toulouche shook her head. "I haven't a watch." There was a murmur of protestation. The 7 or 8 hooligans assembled there awaiting the return of the Beard and the Beadle, sent with Emilet to kidnap Jules, could not believe that Mother Toulouche had told the truth. The sailor caught the old woman by the shoulders and shook her, and went on shaking her. "Liar! Aren't you ashamed to be in a funk with us? Ever since this blessed Mother Toulouche has sold winkles and many other things, ever since she began to make a little purse for herself, which must be a big purse by now, a purse everyone has sweated to fill to the brim, she has always distrusted us. You say you haven't a watch? I tell you, you've got dozens of them." Big Ernestine interrupted:
"It's a half hour over the hour agreed."
A shudder ran through the assembly. Nibet, finger on lip, made a sign that they were to listen. Then, in the mushroom bed, no longer in use, which the band of Numbers had recently adopted as their meeting place, a profound silence fell. "There they are," said Nibet. Big Ernestine leaped up, left the fire, advanced to the far end of the cellar, and imitated the cry of a screech owl to perfection. There was a similar cry in response.
"It's all right, they're here," she said.
She returned to the fire and sat down, but Nibet seized the girl and forced her to get up again. "Go along with you, quick, march!" he said roughly. She protested. Nibet stopped her. "Oh, we can't stand listening to you! Ho there, sailor! Come here, sit down on this plank. You, the Beadle, and me, we're to be the judges. Beard makes the accusation, and if her heart tells her to, Ernestine will defend him."
"I'd rather spit at the tell-tale. You can tear him to bits as far as I'm concerned," cried the girl. "There's nothing disgusts me so much as a tell-tale."
The hooligans crowded round Big Ernestine. They applauded her ironically, for they all knew that, once upon a time, she had been strongly suspected of having dealings with, what they called, the dirty lot at the Bobby's Nest. Silence fell once more. They could hear the rasp of the rope unrolling from a hand windlass attached to an enormous bucket. This was the primitive lift. Moments passed. The hooligans had formed a circle beneath the black hole where the bucket moved up and down. "It goes, old Beard?" questioned Nibet, gazing upwards. "It goes, bloke." "Brought the game?" "That's what we're sending down now." "That's a bit of all right." Sailor now seized the trussed Jules from the bucket and flung him on the ground. "Damaged goods that, eh?" he laughed evilly. The Beadle, Beard, and Emilet were coming down in turn. The group below bent curiously over the prisoner. "He's soft, that sort is!" cried Ernestine, and tapping him on the face with her foot, Big Ernestine tried to make Jules show signs of life. Beard dropped out of the bucket and stopped the game. "Let's see, Ernestine! Stop it now!" After gripping the hand of each comrade in turn, after hugging a bottle and draining it in a long draught, emptying it to the dregs, Beard flung it aside. "Let's get to work! No time to waste! If we finish him off, we'll have to get rid of him before morning." Sailor lifted Jules with the aid of two comrades. They propped him against a massive pillar of wood which supported the cellar roof. They bound their wretched victim to it with strong cords. Meanwhile Ernestine was unwinding the gag. "Take your places on the tribunal," commanded Nibet.
"And you others, a glass of pick-me-up for the fellow."
The pick-me-up intended to restore Jules to consciousness was brought by Mother Toulouche under the form of a large earthen pot full of cold water. She dashed the water in the prisoner's face. Jules slowly opened his eyes and regained his wits amidst an ominous silence. The band watched his return to life with evil smiles. They quietly watched his pallid face turn a livid green with terror. The wretched creature could not utter a syllable. He stared wildly at those about him, his friends of yesterday, at those seated on the mock judgment bench, who, crouching forward, were observing him with sardonic smiles. Nibet put a question.
"You hear and understand us, Jules?"
"Pity!"
howled the victim. Nibet was indifferent to the cry.
"He understands. For my part, I am all for keeping to a proper procedure. I would not have agreed to sit in judgment on him if he had been unable to defend himself. We don't act that way down here."
Turning to his acolytes for signs of their approval, he continued:
"Beard, the word is with you. Let us hear why he has been brought up to judgment. Tell us what he is accused of. Bring up all there is against him."
Beard, who was marching up and down between the hooligan tribunal and the accused, who was half dead and incapable of making a rational statement, stopped, squared himself with an air of satisfaction, and began his speech for the prosecution.
"Jules, has anyone ever done you any harm here? Has anyone played cowardly tricks on you? Set traps to catch you in? Have you ever been cheated out of your fair share of the spoil? Is there anything you can bring up against us? No? Well, here's what we have against you. It's not worth while lying about it either. You are the one who has taken the wind out of our sails over the Danidoff affair. Do you confess that?"
In a voice barely intelligible, Jules gasped out:
"Beard, I don't understand you. I've done nothing. What have you against me?"
Beard took his time. Planted before the prisoner, with hip stuck out and hand in pocket, the other hand raised in tragic invocation towards his comrades.
"Have you heard? Monsieur does not understand. He has not the pluck to be open and above board."
Turning again to the wretched captive, he continued:
"Well, I'm going to explain. It was you, wasn't it, who had to put through the robbery of the lady's jewels? Well, do you know what you did? Do you want me to tell you? Instead of lending us a hand, as was promised and sworn, you kept the cake for yourself. In other words, you and some of your sort serving at the ball put your heads together and shut up the lady in the room they found her in, and that way you got out of sharing with us. So we have been done in the eye over that deal. The proof that you have comrades we know nothing about is that, yesterday when you were done in, they found a way to get you out of the salad basket. It wasn't us. But to return to the Danidoff robbery. Oh, you must have laughed then, but every one has his turn. You are going to laugh on the wrong side of your mouth now. Do you know what they call it? What you've done? Dared to do?"
In the same strangled voice, Jules managed to get out the words:
"But it's not true, I swear to you."
Beard did not listen.
"There's not one of our lot who would give me the lie. To behave like that is treachery. You have betrayed the numbers. There it is in a nutshell. What have you to reply to that?"
For the third time, Jules repeated in a hoarse whisper, for he felt life was gradually leaving him. An awful fear gripped him. He saw he was completely done for.
"I swear I did not do that. I didn't rob the Princess. I don't even know who did."
Jules was perhaps speaking the truth, but he took the worst way to defend himself. If he had had pluck and wit enough to take the Beard's accusation with a high hand, if he had met threats with violent denial and assertion, it is quite possible he might have made an impression in his favour. But he cried for pity and for mercy from men who were pitiless. He was afraid. His fear was shown by the convulsive trembling which agitated his wretched body, by his ghastly pallor, by the cold drops of sweat rolling down his forehead. He was no longer a man. It was a lamentable bit of human wreckage the hooligans had before them, and the more lamentable this wreck showed itself to be, the less worthy of their interest it seemed. When Jules gasped out once again:
"I swear to you it was not I. No, I did not do it,"
The hooligans, moved by a common impulse, rose, indignant, furious, mad with rage.
"That's a good one, that is!"
yelled Nibet, who, beside himself with rage, suddenly forgot his avowed respect for judicial forms.
"Since he is determined to tell lies and hasn't the pluck to say what he's done, there's only one thing for us to do, and that is to stop his mouth up. Ernestine, put the plug back."
And as the girl once more rolled the scarf round and round the head of the miserable Jules, Nibet turned to his comrades.
"Now then, one hasn't any need to waste more time over it. We know all the story, not so? It's settled, I tell you. A fellow who has done what he has done, what does he deserve? You answer first, Mother Toulouche, since you are the oldest."
Mother Toulouche stretched out a trembling hand, as though calling on Heaven to witness an oath.
"I," said the old woman, with a wicked gleam in her eyes, "I don't hesitate. Comrades who flinch, sneaks who betray, get rid of them, say I. I condemn him to death."
The old woman's sentence was greeted with loud applause. Nibet resumed.
"It is said. It is unanimous. Make a quick finish, my lads. Since each has been injured, let him each take his revenge. I say death by the hammer."
In that smoke-thickened air rose a chorus of hate and vengeance.
"Death by the hammer! Death by the hammer!"
In that noisome lair of the bandits a horrible scene ensued. Mother Toulouche went groping in a dark corner. She searched for and found a blacksmith's hammer. She lifted it with trembling hands, and planting herself in front of the victim, more dead than alive, she said in a menacing voice: "You did harm to the Numbers. You wronged them. Here goes for that, then." The hammer described a quarter of a circle in the air, and descended in a smashing blow on the wretched victim's face. The awful punishment had begun. According to age, one after another, the hooligans passed on the hammer, and, in a blind passion of hate, beat following beat on the agonizing body of Jules. At last the terrible agony was over and done. The passion of hate, the lust for revenge, had burnt themselves out. Jules had expiated the crime they had imputed to him. The band were the victims of a paralysing fatigue. Emilet flung the blood-stained hammer into a far corner of their den. "Well done," said he. "He has paid the price." Emilet's eyes fell on Nibet. He was leaning against the wall, and with folded arms was watching the scene in which he had taken no part. Walking up to the warder, Emilet demanded: "Ho, ho! You backed out of it, did you, my boy? You didn't have a throw, did you? No?" Nibet grinned sardonically. "Don't talk rubbish, Emilet. If I have stood aside, I had my reasons for doing so. We haven't done with Jules yet, not by a long chalk. Now that he's been killed, he's got to be got rid of, isn't that true? Look at yourselves, my lambs, you're covered with red. It will take you all of an hour to make yourselves presentable. Now look at me. I'm neat and clean, and I have a plan, a famous plan to rid us of that corpse there. Now just you stir your stumps, Emilet. I am going off to make preparations. I'll give you 10 minutes to make yourself fit to be seen. It's we, too, who are to be the undertakers, and I swear to you that we will give them no end of trouble to the curiosity mongers at police headquarters." End of chapter 22. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com. Section 23 of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 23. From Vaugirard to Montmartre. On the Boulevard des Palais, Jérôme Fandor looked at his watch. It was half an hour after noon. "The hour for copy! Courage! I will go to La Capitale." Scarcely had he put foot in the large hall when the editorial secretary called. "There you are, Fandor, at last! That's a good thing! Whatever have you been up to since yesterday evening? I got them to telephone to you twice, but they could not get on to you, try as they might. My dear fellow, you really mustn't absent yourself without giving us warning." Fandor looked jovial, certainly not repentant. "Oh, say at once that I've been in the country. But seriously, what did you want me for? Is there anything new?" "A most mysterious scandal." "Another?" "Yes, you know Thomery, the sugar refiner." "Yes, I know him." "Well, he has disappeared. No one knows where he is." Fandor took the news stolidly.
You don't astonish me. You must be prepared for anything from those sort of people."
It was the turn of the secretary to be surprised at Fandor's calmness.
"But, old man, I'm telling you of a disappearance which is causing any amount of talk in Paris. You don't seem to grasp the situation. Surely you know that Thomery represents one of the biggest fortunes known?"
"I know he is worth a lot."
"His flight will bring ruin to many."
"Others will probably be enriched by it."
"Probably. That's not our concern. What we are after are details about his disappearance. You are free to day, are you not? Will you take the affair in hand then? I would put off the appearance of the paper for half an hour rather than not have details to report which would throw some light on this extraordinary affair."
Then, as Fandor did not show the slightest intention of going in search of material for a Thomery article, the secretary laughed.
"Why don't you start on the trail, Fandor? My word, I don't recognise a Fandor who is not off like a zigzag of lightning on such a reporting job as this. We want illuminating details, my dear man."
"You think I haven't got any, then? Be easy. This evening's issue of La Capitale will have all the details you could desire on the vanishing of Thomery." Thereupon, Fandor turned on his heel without further explanation, and went towards one of his colleagues, who went by the title of financier of the paper. The financier had an official manner, and had an office of his own, the walls of which were carefully padded, for Marville, that was his name, frequently received visits from important personages. Fandor began questioning him on the subject of Thomery's disappearance.
"Tell me, my dear fellow, what is happening in the financial world, now that Thomery has disappeared?"
"What do you mean?"
"Where is the money going? All the coppers?"
"The coppers?"
"Why, yes. I fancy that when an old fellow like that does the vanishing trick, there are terrible results on the Bourse. Will you be kind enough to explain what does happen in such a case?"
Very much flattered by Fandor's request, Marville cried: "But, my boy, you are asking for nothing less than a course of political economy, but I cannot do that on the spur of the moment. State precisely what you want to know."
"What I want to know is just this: who loses money through Thomery's disappearance?"
The financier raised his hands to heaven. "But everybody! Everybody! Thomery was a daring fellow. Without him his business is nothing. There was a big failure on the market to day."
"Good. But who gains by it?"
"How, who gains by it?"
"Yes. I presume Thomery's disappearance must be profitable to some one? Can you think of any people to whose interest it would be that this old fellow should disappear?"
The financier reflected. "Those who gain money by the disappearance of Thomery only the speculators, I should say. Suppose now that a Monsieur Tartempion had bought Thomery shares at 90 francs. To day those shares would not be worth more than 70 francs. Tartempion loses money. But let us suppose some financier speculates on the probable fall of Thomery shares, and has sold to clients speculating on the rise of these shares to be delivered in a fortnight, at a price of 90 francs. If Thomery was still there, his shares would be worth, possibly, the 90 francs, possibly more. In the first case, the financier's deal would amount to nothing. In the second case, his deal would be a deplorable one, because he would be obliged to deliver at an inferior price, and would be responsible for the difference."
"Whilst Thomery dead?"
"Dead, no, but simply in flight. His shares fall to nothing, and this same financier may buy at 60 francs, which he must deliver at 90 francs, in 15 days. In that case he has done excellent business."
"Excellent, certainly. And tell me, my dear Marville, do you know if there has been any such deal in Thomery shares on a large scale?"
"Ah, you ask me more than I can tell you now, but that would be known at the Bourse." No doubt Jérôme Fandor was going to continue his interrogation, but there was a great disturbance in the editorial room near by. They were shouting:
"Fandor! Fandor!"
The editorial secretary entered the financier's room, and, catching sight of Fandor, he cried:
"What's the meaning of this? What are you up to here? I told you this Thomery affair was important. Be off for the news as quick as you can. Here is the Havas. It seems they have just found Thomery's body in a little apartment in the rue Lecourbe."
Fandor forced himself to appear very interested.
"Already? The police have been quick. I also had an idea that that Thomery had more than simply disappeared." "You had that idea?" asked the startled secretary. "Yes, my dear fellow, I had, absolutely." After a silence, Fandor added: "All the same, I am going out to get news. In half an hour's time I will telephone details of the death. Does the Havas say whether it is a crime or a suicide?" "No. Evidently the police know nothing." "Monsieur Havard, I am delighted to meet you. Surely now you will not refuse to give me a little interview?"
"Not I, my dear Fandor. I know only too well that you would not take no for an answer."
"And you are right. I beg of you to give me some details, not as regards Thomery's death, for I have already made my little investigation touching that, but as to how the police managed to find the poor man's body."
"In the easiest way in the world. Monsieur Thomery's servants were very much astonished yesterday morning when they could not find their master at the house. After 11, Thomery's absence from the Bourse gave rise to disquieting rumours. He had some big deals to put through, therefore his absence could only be accounted for in one way: he had had an accident of some sort. Naturally enough, they warned headquarters, and at once I suspected there might be a little scandal of some sort. You guessed that I immediately went myself to Thomery's house? I examined his papers, and I found by chance 3 receipts for the rent of a flat, in the name of Monsieur Durand, rue de Courbe. One of them was of recent date. I, of course, sent one of my men to ascertain who lived there. This man learned from the portress that there was a new tenant there who had not yet moved in with his furniture, but who, the evening before, had brought in a heavy trunk. My man went up to his flat and had the door opened. You know under what conditions he found Thomery's dead body." "And you did not find indications which went to show why Monsieur Thomery committed suicide?" "Committed suicide? When a financier disappears, my Fandor, one is always tempted to cry suicide, but this time I confess to you that I do not think it was anything of the kind."
"Because?"
"Because," and Monsieur Havard bent his head, "well, when I reached the scene of the crime, I immediately thought that we were not face to face with a suicide. A man who wishes to kill himself, and to kill himself because of money affairs, a man like Thomery, does not feel the necessity of committing suicide in a little flat rented under a false name, and in front of a trunk, which you know, do you not, belonged to Mademoiselle Dollon. One might swear that everything was arranged expressly to make anyone believe that Thomery had strangled himself, after having stolen the trunk, for some unknown reason."
"You did not find any kind of clue?"
"Yes, indeed, and you know it as well as I do, for I have no doubt the extraordinary event has been the gossip of the neighbourhood. On the cover of the trunk we have once again found an imprint, a very clear impression, the famous imprint of Jacques Dollon."
"And you found nothing else?"
"Yes, in the dust on the floor we found the marks of steps, numerous footmarks. We have made tracings of them."
"My steps, evidently," thought Fandor.
But what he said was:
"What, in short, is your view of the general position, Monsieur Havard?"
"I am very much bothered about it. For my part, I think we are once again faced by another of Jacques Dollon's crimes. This wretch, after having attempted to assassinate his sister, has learned that we were going to search the Mademoiselle's room. He then made arrangements to steal this trunk, by pretending to be a police inspector, as you know. Then he brought the trunk to his flat, examined its contents thoroughly, and having some special interest in the sugar refiner's death, he managed to get him to come to the flat, and there assassinated him, leaving his dead body in front of this trunk, where it was bound to be seen. All this he did in order to tangle the traces and perplex those on his track."
"But how do you explain the fact of Jacques Dollon being so simple as to leave the imprints of his hand everywhere? Deuce take it, this individual is at liberty. He reads the papers. He knows that Monsieur Bertillon is tracing him. So great a criminal would certainly be on his guard."
"Of course. Such a successful criminal as Dollon has shown himself to be must have resources at his disposal which allow him to laugh at the police. He does not trouble to cover his tracks. It is enough for him that he should escape us." As Fandor could not suppress a smile, the chief of the detective force added: "Oh, we shall finish by arresting Dollon, have no fear. So far he has quite extraordinary luck in his favour, but the luck will turn, and we shall put our hand on his collar."
"I certainly hope you may, but what are you going to do now?"
The two had stopped on the edge of the pavement, and were talking without paying any attention to the passers by, who rubbed shoulders with them. The well known journalist and the important police official were unrecognised. Monsieur Havard took Fandor's arm. "Look here, come along with me, Fandor. Just the time to telephone to a police station, and then I will take you with me to make a fresh investigation." "Where?" "At Jacques Dollon's studio. I have kept the key of the house, and I wish to see whether I can find any other rent receipts made out in the name of Durand. Though I can see how Dollon inveigled Dollon into a trap, I do not understand how it came about that Thomery paid the rent of that trap. There is some subtle contrivance of Dollon's here. I want to get to the bottom of it. Will you come to the rue Norvins?" "I jolly well will!" cried Fandor. The chief of the detective force telephoned to headquarters, whilst Fandor got into communication with La Capitale. He sent on a report of the Thomery case up to that moment. Quitting the police station, the two men hailed a cab, and were driven to the rue Norvins. As far as they could tell, the artist's house had not been entered since Elizabeth Dollon's departure. The neglected garden, with its rank growth of grass and weeds, gave an added air of melancholy to the deserted house. Monsieur Havard put the key in the lock of the front door. "Don't you think, Fandor, it gives one a queer feeling to enter a house where an unaccountable crime has been committed?" The key grated in the lock, and Monsieur Havard added: "In spite of oneself, there is the feeling that some terrifying spectre is lurking within." "Or a ghost," said Fandor. As the door was unlocked and opened, our journalist asked: "Where shall we start this domiciliary visit?" "Let us begin with the studio," replied Monsieur Havard, mounting to the first story. No sooner had they entered the room than a double cry escaped from the two men. "Oh!" "Great Heaven!" In the middle of the studio there was the rigid body of a man hanging. They rushed forward. "Dead!" was Monsieur Havard's cry. "Horribly dead!" echoed Fandor. "Shall we never lay hands on those wretches?" Monsieur Havard stared horrified at the hanging corpse. He brought a chair, grasped the strong sharp knife he always carried about him, and, aided by Fandor, he cut the rope, laid the hanged man flat on the floor, and proceeded to examine the miserable remnant of a human being. The face was swollen, gashed, crushed. "The hands have been dipped in vitriol. They did not want finger prints taken. It is Jacques Dollon." Fandor shook his head. "Jacques Dollon? Of course it isn't! If it were Dollon, he would not hang himself here. Why should he hang himself?" Monsieur Havard remarked: "He has not hanged himself. Again the stage has been set. I could swear the man had been killed by blows from a hammer, and hanged afterwards. It seems to me that if death had been caused through strangulation, there would have been marks round the neck. But see, Fandor, the rope has hardly made a mark." "No, the man was dead when they strung him up." "It is of secondary importance," remarked Fandor, who was preoccupied. "You are mistaken. It matters a great deal. It decidedly looks as if Dollon had accomplices who wished to be rid of him." Fandor shook his head. "It is not Dollon. It cannot be Dollon." "Look at the vitriolised hands. That was a precaution." "I say, as you did just now, it's like a set piece, a bit of slag assassin's stagecraft." "I say, in Dollon's house we have found Dollon at home." Fandor was not convinced. He felt certain Dollon had lied in the Dépôt. "Well, Elizabeth Dollon can settle the question for us. There may be some physical peculiarity, some mark by which she can identify her brother's body." But Fandor was examining the body very carefully. Suddenly he rose from his stooping posture, exclaiming: "I know who it is!" "Who?" "Jules! None other than Madame Bourrat's servant, Jules! That is to say, an accomplice whom the bandits we are after wanted to be rid of. He might have given them away, when brought up for examination. That was why they managed his escape. They killed him afterwards, because he had served their turn and was now an encumbrance." "Your explanation is plausible, Fandor, but how about the truth of it?" "This proves the truth of it!" cried Fandor, pointing to a cicatrice on the back of the neck of the murdered man. It was the clear mark of where an abscess had been. "I am certain I noticed a similar mark on the neck of Jules. He sat in front of me the other day, and I particularly noticed this mark. The dead man is Jules. I am certain it is Jules." Monsieur Havard was silent. Presently he said: If it is Jules, it must be admitted that we are no farther forward." Fandor was about to utter a protest, when there was a knock on the studio door. Startled, the two men looked at each other anxiously. "It can only be one of the force," murmured Monsieur Havard. "I told them I was coming here with you, and that they were to send for me if necessary." The two men walked to the door. Monsieur Havard opened it. There stood a cyclist member of the police force. He saluted respectfully, and told his chief that he had come with a message from Michel. "The message?"
"That the arrest is successful, chief."
"Which?"
"That of the band of Numbers, chief."
"Good. Whom have you bagged?"
"Almost the whole lot, chief."
"That is to say?"
"Mother Toulouche, Beard, Mimile, otherwise Emilet, and the Cooper, and a few more whose names are not known."
Fandor said, laughing: "Not Cranajour, I'm certain."
"No, Cranajour has escaped," answered the policeman.
Turning to Monsieur Havard, he asked:
"Have you no instructions, chief?"
"No. Tell me, how did the capture go?"
"Perfectly, chief. They were assembled in Mother Toulouche's store. They went like lambs."
"Good, good." Monsieur Havard gave the policeman some orders. The cyclist leaped into the saddle and disappeared. "How did you guess that Cranajour was still at liberty?" asked Monsieur Havard. Fandor smiled.
"Good business. You take me to be more stupid than I am. It is Cranajour's information which has enabled you to arrest the band of Numbers. Consequently..."
"Cranajour's information? You are mad, Fandor! Whatever makes you imagine that Cranajour belongs to our force?" Fandor looked Monsieur Havard straight in the eye, and said coolly:
"Juve has never told me that he had sent in his resignation."
Monsieur Havard looked searchingly at our journalist before remarking: "Come now, what is this you are telling me? Poor Juve?" Fandor wished to save the chief of the detective department from telling useless falsehoods.
"Monsieur Havard, interrogate the members of the band of Numbers, and don't trouble about how I got my information. But be sure of one thing: there are dead men of whom I can tell tales, of whose existence I am as well aware as you yourself."
As the chief stared at the journalist, looking more and more astonished, Fandor added:
"And I do not refer to Dollon. I am referring to Juve, to my dear friend Juve, the king of detectives."
End of Chapter 23. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Section 24 of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 24. At Saint Lazare.
"Hop along there! See if you can't hurry up a bit!"
The warder opened the door of Elizabeth Dollon's cell, and pushed in an old woman, a horrid-looking creature.
"In with you!" commanded the warder in a harsh tone. "You are to stay here till to morrow. We will find another place for you when we get instructions."
Poor Elizabeth Dollon stared miserably at this strange companion which fate, in the person of a warder, had thrust on her. The old woman stared with no little curiosity at the pale, sad girl. Silence fell for a few minutes. Then the new prisoner asked in a tone of rough familiarity:
"What's your name?"
"I call myself Elizabeth."
"Don't know it. Elizabeth who?"
"Elizabeth Dollon." The old woman rose from the corner of the mattress she had seated herself on.
"True? You're Elizabeth Dollon? Well, that's funny. Have you been nabbed long?"
"You ask if it is long since I was..."
"Nabbed, taken, arrested, eh?"
Elizabeth nodded in the affirmative. It seemed to her that an infinity of time had passed since her imprisonment at Saint Lazare.
"I was nabbed last night. If you want to know my name, I'm called Mother Toulouche. They say I'm one of the band of Numbers, and that I receive stolen goods. Lies! That's well understood."
Elizabeth had no desire to go into such an unsavoury question. This horrid old woman rather frightened her, but, such had been her distress and fears since she had been a prisoner, that it was a relief not to be quite alone. To have even this old creature to speak to was better than solitary confinement. In her character of old jail bird, Mother Toulouche made herself quickly at home.
"Move to morrow, they say I'm to be. Pity! At bottom, you're not one of the scurvy sort, but you must be here to play spy on me, for all that. When do you go out? Are you long for San Lago?"
Alas, how could Elizabeth tell?
"I like being a barrister," thought Fandor as he entered Saint Lazare. "For the last hour I have felt a different person, much more serious, more sure of myself, not to say more eloquent. I must be eloquent, since I have succeeded in persuading my friend, Maître Dubard, to get himself appointed officially as Mademoiselle Dollon's counsel, then to obtain a permit of communication, and to hand this same permit over to me, so that his identification papers, safely tucked away in my portfolio, make of me the most indisputable of Maîtres Dubard." Fandor might well congratulate himself. By means of this ruse, his own idea, he was enabled to see Elizabeth, not in the prison parlour, but in a special cell, and without a witness. As Fandor crossed the threshold of the sordid building, he said to himself: "I am Maître Dubard, visiting his client, in order to prepare her defence." He easily accomplished the necessary formalities, and, at last, he saw himself being conducted by a morose warder to a little parlour, scantily furnished with a table and a few stools. "Please be seated, maître," said the surly fellow. "I'll fetch your client along." Fandor put down his portfolio, but remained standing, anxious, all a-quiver at the thought that he was about to see his dear Elizabeth appear between two warders, just like a common prisoner. "In a moment she will be here," thought he. But she must on no account recognise him on entering. By an exclamation she might betray his identity and complicate things. Therefore Fandor feigned to be absorbed in a newspaper he unfolded and raised, so as to hide his face from the approaching pair. The door opened. "Come now, go in," growled the warder. "Maître, when you wish to leave, you have only to ring." The door fell to heavily behind the warder. Fandor made a sharp movement. He stood revealed. He hurried up to Elizabeth. "Oh, tell me how you are, Mademoiselle Elizabeth!" he cried. But the girl was struck dumb. She grew suddenly pale, and made no reply. "Elizabeth! Elizabeth! Will you not give me your hand even? You do not understand why I am here? I had to see you, speak to you without a witness. That's why I have passed myself off as an advocate." The startled girl was regaining her self-control. Fandor was gazing at her with frankly admiring eyes. "Poor Elizabeth! How I have made you suffer!" The poor girl's eyes filled with tears. "Why have you betrayed me?" she demanded in a voice trembling with restrained emotion. "Oh, how could you get me arrested? You, who well know I am not guilty!" "You really believe I have betrayed you? You actually credited me with that?" These two young people, meeting in a prison parlour under such tragic circumstances, were hurt and even angry with each other. Elizabeth Dollon went on: "Why did you not tell me that you had found on that piece of soap traces of my brother's finger marks? Why did you accuse me of having received a visit from him, when you yourself had proved that he was dead?" Fandor took Elizabeth's two little hands in his, and pressed them long and tenderly. "My dear Elizabeth, when I engineered this theatrical stroke in the presence of the examining magistrate, in order to secure your arrest, believe me, I had no time to warn you of what I meant to do. Ah, if I could have warned you! But it would have only disturbed you to no good purpose. Besides, your being really taken by surprise was a help. There could not be any idea of collusion. Of course, you want the answer to this riddle? You shall have it. That is why I am here. Don't you remember, Elizabeth, that on the evening before the fatal day you told me that I had twice rung you up on the telephone, and that each time you answered the call you could not find me at the end of the line? You cannot imagine what I felt when I heard you say that. I never telephoned to the convent. The obvious conclusion was that the individuals who for some reason did not wish to make themselves known did wish to keep track of you, and to assure themselves that you were still at the convent, rue de la Glacière." Fandor's voice trembled a little as he went on: "And I was at once afraid, my poor child, that these people who were pursuing you might be the very same who had got into Madame Bourrat's house and had tried to kill you. Ah, do you not see how greatly it hurt and troubled me to think that I had taken you to the convent, and had there placed you in security, as I thought, but where you were far from being safe?" Again Fandor took Elizabeth's hands in his. "You do understand now, dear child, why I had you arrested? I felt you would be safe here. You see, I could not get your persecutors imprisoned, and so prevent them from getting at you. To imprison you was the alternative. You are better guarded here than elsewhere."
Elizabeth smiled a little smile when she saw how moved Fandor was.
"But," replied she, "there is the other point. You certainly told me that you were sure my brother was killed in prison, in his cell."
"Certainly I did. The assassination of your brother was premeditated. If the criminals have had accomplices at the Dépôt, and such there certainly were, they have been bought over little by little. The fact of your brother's murder is fresh in the memory of the police, of all. Therefore, a special watch is kept over you. I ascertained that it would be so, and Fuselier himself assured me of it. There is a warder specially told off to keep a close guard over you, a safe man, known to be beyond suspicion. No, Elizabeth, do believe me, if I was the cause of your horrified surprise the other day, and then of your imprisonment, I wished to be sure that you were as safe as it was possible to be. Then, freed from such intense anxiety, I felt I should be at liberty to continue my investigations. Do say you forgive me."
All Elizabeth could say was:
"But why not have warned me? I still can't see."
"Why, because I only thought of the plan at the last moment. Also because I feared you might not be able to act surprised naturally enough. It was absolutely, yes, absolutely necessary that everyone should take your arrest seriously. Surely, Elizabeth, you can understand that?"
He repeated his plea.
Do say you forgive me, Elizabeth."
The smile returned to Elizabeth's lips. She was much moved.
"Indeed I do. You are always my very good friend, you think of everything, and you watch over me as if..."
Intimidated, blushing hotly, she stopped short, then changed the conversation.
"Do tell me if you have heard anything fresh?"
Fandor returned to his normal self also. He had sworn to himself that he would not tell Elizabeth he loved her until he had succeeded in unravelling the tangled skein of the terrible Dollon affair.
"I shall speak," thought he, "when she is once more at peace and free, when she is out of danger. I do not want her to consent to love me just because I have devoted myself to her brother's case. Elizabeth shall be my wife, please God, but only if I deserve her, if I can win her."
And Jérôme Fandor told her the story of the famous wicker trunk, but he did not mention Thomery's death, nor did he speak of the horrible murder of Jules. What was the use of saddening Elizabeth, of adding needlessly to her terrors? Instead, he thought it better to learn what he could from her.
"I have not found that famous list," said he.
"Oh, I beg your pardon!" cried Elizabeth. "I was so worried! Just imagine that! I found the list after all, and I thought I had lost it. It was in one of my little handbags. I had put it there to bring to you. Here it is. They were quite willing to let me keep it."
Fandor eagerly took the paper from Elizabeth and proceeded to examine it. Yes, it certainly was a page torn from a notebook of medium size. An unknown hand had traced the following words in bold writing. The names succeeded one another in the form of a list: Baroness de Vibray, April 3, Jacques Dollon. Dep, idem. Sonia Danidoff, April 12. Barbey Nanteuil, May 15. Gérin, Madame B. Thomery during May. Barbey Nanteuil end May. Fandor could not find anything more on the paper. Whilst Elizabeth sat silent, Fandor reflected.
Baroness de Vibray, April 3, Jacques Dollon.
These correspond exactly with the commencement of this mysterious affair, the two first deaths, and the date of their death. What does Dep signify? The initials of a name, or... Yes, Dep, Dépôt idem, yes. Dépôt the same day, that's it. Sonia Danidoff, April 12. The full name, the exact date. Barbey Nanteuil, May 15. The affair of Rue du Quatre Septembre occurred May 20. That's pretty near. Two more names and one date which exactly tallies. Gérin? Madame B? Who are they? Why no date? Ah, Gérin, lawyer of Madame de Vibray, a crime planned without date, perhaps because he was not indispensable. And Thomery! Thomery, who died in the middle of May, as this plan indicates. But how about the last line? Barbey Nanteuil, end of May. Oh, beyond a doubt, the bankers were to be victims of some fresh aggression on the part of the mysterious author of these lines.
Barbey Nanteuil, end of May. We are at the 28th of the month, only 3 more days before the sinister date falls due. Are they to be attacked, or is it their money? How to defend them? How to organise a trap for the mice? Suddenly Fandor looked up, saw Elizabeth's anxiety, and said quietly: "Well, this list agrees in every particular with the description you gave me of it, and I don't see what fresh information we are likely to get from it. However, will you leave it with me?" Fandor rose. "Ah, there is one point which has just occurred to me." Fandor's voice trembled a good deal. "Do you know for a fact that your brother had bought Thomery shares?" "He had very few, 3 or 4. I think the Barbey Nanteuil got them for him." "And your brother had to pay for them by a certain date?" "Yes." Fandor now felt he must tear himself away. He was deeply moved. "Elizabeth! Elizabeth!" he cried. "I swear to you we shall clear up these dreadful mysteries amidst which we live, and more, you and I. Only have confidence, I implore you. Grant me a week's grace, less even." Fandor pressed Elizabeth's hands as though he could never let them go. Such little hands, and so dear! It was not a farewell he took, it was a veritable flight he took from the girl who now meant so much to him. Leaving the prison, Fandor walked straight ahead, thinking aloud. "It is clear, evident. The Barbey Nanteuils have sold Thomery shares to be paid up on a certain date. Thomery was murdered so that his shares should fall to 0, and so that Barbey Nanteuils should realise enormous sums at their monthly clearance. Next Saturday the coffers of the Barbey Nanteuil bank will be full of gold. And this same Saturday is the last day of May, the fatal day inscribed on the list. Yes, this coming Saturday they will pillage the Barbey Nanteuil bank." End of Chapter 24. Read by Don W. Jenkins. Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Section 25 of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 25. A Mouse Trap. Jérôme Fandor had been ringing Juve's doorbell in vain. The great detective was not at home. "What the deuce is he doing? What has become of him? Never have I needed his advice as I need it now. His support, encouragement, what a comfort they would be! It is impossible he would have dissuaded me against the attempt, or he might have joined forces with me. Hang it all! It was a jolly bad move on Juve's part to make himself scarce at such a critical moment for me. It is a long time, too, since I had news of him. Were I not certain that he has sound reasons for his absence Juve never acts haphazard I should be desperately anxious." Fandor consulted his watch. 4 o'clock. He had time then. He could think over all the dramatic events in which he had been involved during the past weeks, beginning with the rue Norvins affair, and ending how and when? At last our journalist arrived before the immense building which forms the corner of the rue de Clichy. He saw in front of him the tall windows of the flat occupied by Nanteuil. On the ground floor were the bank offices. "Well," thought Fandor, "I certainly am going to do an unconventional thing. If my summing up of them is right, these bankers are balanced, calm, cold, without imagination, and distrusting it in others. I shall have to be eloquent to convince them, to make them listen to me and get them to do what I want. Will they show me the door, as though I were an intriguer or a madman? I shall not let them do it. Ah, they will owe me a fine candle if I have the good luck. Whether there will be good luck for my venture, and gratitude from the bankers, remains to be seen. Here goes." Seated behind their large and important looking writing table, as though judges behind a judgment seat, Messieurs Barbey and Nanteuil, in their immense reception office, separated from the rest of the world by a number of padded doors, had just said to Fandor, who was standing in front of them: "We are listening to you, monsieur." Fandor had asked to see the bankers, and to see them only, stating that he would wait if they were engaged. He had been shown into a handsomely furnished room, then into another, then into a third. Finally he had been ushered into the office of the partners.
He had waited there for a few minutes alone. He recognized it as the same room in which he had interviewed Monsieur Barbey a few weeks earlier. Again he saw the same hangings, the same fine rugs, the same velvet armchair of classic design. Then Barbey, solemn, and Nanteuil, elegant, arose in his buttonhole, had entered the room, their manner stiff starched, showing no surprise. Accustomed as they were to receive visitors of all sorts and all kinds, they were polite, but not cordial. Fandor, accustomed to society as he was, and audacious as he had to be in the exercise of his profession, was intimidated for a moment by the calm simplicity of the two men, these strictly conventional bankers, to whom he was about to say such strange things and make a most unexpected proposition. First of all, he made excuse on excuse for having disturbed the bankers at their post time. Then anxiety overcame every consideration of conventional propriety. Full of persuasive ardour, he went straight to the point. "Messieurs," declared he, "you are more deeply involved than you might think in the mysterious affairs occupying the attention of the police at this moment. So far, they have not got to the bottom of them. I myself, through the necessities of my profession, and owing to other circumstances, have been drawn into an investigation, conjointly with the detective department, an investigation which has had definite results. It has enabled me to discover clues of the highest importance. I learned too late, alas, to prevent the tragedies, that certain persons were the chosen victims of these mysterious criminals. Madame de Vibray, the Princess Danidoff were condemned beforehand. The robbery of your gold was carefully arranged. Now to my point. Messieurs, you yourselves are sentenced. The execution of the sentence to be carried out 3 days hence. Do you believe me?" Fandor had drawn nearer the two bankers. Only the immense mahogany writing table stood between them. The partners had listened with cold attention. Nevertheless, a slight trembling of Monsieur Barbey's lips betrayed hidden feeling. Noticing this, Fandor was emboldened to proceed. Monsieur Nanteuil, in a slightly sneering tone, but with a perfectly correct manner, replied to the ardent young journalist: "We are greatly obliged to you, monsieur, for the sympathy you have shown us by coming to give us information regarding the mysterious assassins whom the police are so zealously trying to round up. Believe me, we are accustomed to take our precautions, seeing that we have the handling of enormous sums of money. We are none the less grateful to you for your interest in us, and for your warning." "It is not a question of gratitude," interrupted Fandor sharply. "We have to deal with very strong opponents. I say we, because I have become more and more personally involved in all these crime tragedies. Believe me, I speak from 5 years' experience as a reporter who has had to report, on an average, 1 crime a day. Up to now, nothing, absolutely nothing, has hindered the criminals from executing their plans, but, warned in time, we may be able to thwart them." "But," interrupted Monsieur Barbey, who had grown more and more serious, "what are you aiming at?" Fandor felt that the decisive moment had arrived. Bending across the table, his face almost touching the faces of the two men, he said slowly and distinctly: "Messieurs, I have asked La Capitale to grant me 3 days' leave. I have brought a little travelling bag with me. Here it is. Leaving home as I did about half an hour ago, I consider I have arrived at the end of my journey. Will you offer me hospitality for the next 48 hours? I know that you, Monsieur Nanteuil, live above your offices, whilst Monsieur Barbey goes home every evening to his place at Saint Germain. I ask you to give up your room to me, for I am determined not to leave here for an instant." Fandor, in his eagerness, had spoken faster and faster, and his heart was beating violently. He stared fixedly at the two men. He quite expected that his demand would excite astonishment, that objections would be raised, and he was ready with a crowd of arguments by which to convince them and carry his point. But the surprise was his, for the bankers did not seem particularly astonished. They consulted each other with a look. Then, as Barbey opened his mouth to reply, Nanteuil began to speak, rising politely at the same time: "Monsieur Fandor, your last statements and remarks are too serious to be passed over lightly. Your offer is too generous to be rejected without consideration. Will you allow us to retire for a minute or two? My partner and I will discuss the question." For about 10 minutes, Fandor marched up and down the sumptuous room; then one of the padded doors opened silently, and Barbey entered more solemn than ever. Nanteuil was smiling. "Monsieur," said Barbey, in weighty tones, My partner and I, in view of the exceptional seriousness of the situation, for your words carry conviction, have come to a decision. We beg of you to consider yourself our guest from this moment, and to consider this house as your own." "And it is understood, of course, that you will dine with us this evening," added Nanteuil with friendly graciousness. "Monsieur Barbey will be of the party, and will pass the night in our company. And you can count on it that we shall drink a good bottle of Burgundy to enable us to await with patience and serenity the audacious individuals you say we are to expect. Dear Monsieur Fandor, here are some illustrated papers with some gay sketches of dear little women to exercise your patience over, whilst we sign our outgoing letters as fast as possible." Chapter 25. By Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Section 26 of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. By Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 26. In the Trap. The servant had retired, leaving the three men to their fruit and wine. His hosts turned to Fandor in mute interrogation, but Fandor continued to peel a superb peach with the utmost coolness. He did not seem disposed to talk. Barbey broke the silence. "Tell me, now that your first day on guard is ended, and you have not left us for a moment, have you noticed anything at all suspicious?" Fandor shook his head. "Nothing whatever." This was not strictly true, for he had noticed an individual in the bank, occupied in repairing the telephone. He had made discreet inquiries, and had been told that he was a workman sent by the State, at the request of the bankers, to see that the lines were in good working order. This explanation had at first set his mind at rest regarding the comings and goings of this individual. But just when he was going in to dinner at 7 o'clock, Fandor had come across the man in the vestibule of the bank, making preparations to depart. It had been a painful surprise for Fandor. He recognised the man, but could not remember exactly who he was or where he had seen him. Was this workman one of the mysterious band of criminals who, he was more and more convinced, meant to strike a blow at Monsieur Barbey and his partner Nanteuil? If Fandor had had anything to go upon, he would have had the man shadowed. But he had no sure ground for his suspicions. Besides, sent by the State, the man was most probably what he seemed. As he was working for the Government, he could easily be traced should such a step be found necessary. But to make certain that all was as it should be, Fandor had examined the work done by this individual during the day. There was nothing wrong with it. Beyond a doubt the man was an expert. Therefore Fandor had felt justified in saying that he had noticed nothing suspicious during the day. "So much the worse," remarked Monsieur Barbey with a shrug. "Probably the individuals who are threatening us have been warned of your presence here, and are on their guard. I rejoice as far as we are concerned, but, as regards the general interest, I almost regret it. That your trap should prove effective is what we must wish." "Have no fear, dear Monsieur Barbey, it will not be laid in vain. Knowing the cunning, the cleverness of my adversaries, I have not the least doubt they know I am here. But I also know that the audacity of these criminals is such, that my presence here would not deter them from making their attempt. They believe themselves the stronger, but I hope to undeceive them." "What is your plan of campaign to night?" asked Monsieur Nanteuil. "Before replying to that, will you show me all the means of access to the house?" "With the greatest pleasure." The three men left the dining room, then went into the vestibule. "Our courtyard gate is at the far end of the house on the right," said Nanteuil. "On the left there are the bank offices, they occupy this ground floor. The only entrance to them is through this vestibule. This door closed, it is impossible to get in." "Not by the windows looking on to the street?" asked Fandor. "No, those windows have heavy iron bars before them. To remove them would be difficult, very. As to the windows looking on to the garden, they are closed every evening, you can see for yourself, by strong wooden shutters fastened on the inside." "So the bank offices are perfectly protected?" said Fandor. "We believe so. Now come upstairs to the floor above. Here is a large corridor, and that door on the right opens into a library. The two rooms which come next are my own room and a dressing room. The other rooms are unoccupied." "Does your room face the street or the garden?" asked Fandor. "The garden." "And the windows?" "The windows?" "Yes. Would it be difficult or impossible to climb up to them?" "It would be difficult, but not impossible. No one ever enters the garden. If absolutely necessary, a ladder could be placed against them, a square of glass could be cut out, and the fastening could be undone. But come and see the room. You can then judge for yourself." Fandor inspected the room most carefully. The banker was right. It would be comparatively easy to get into the room by the window, but the other entrances to the room could be easily watched. They resolved themselves into one door which opened on to the corridor. Monsieur Nanteuil's room was lightly furnished. He evidently favoured the modern method. It was a bare apartment, but it was hygienic. "Ah," said Fandor, "the bed has its back to the door and faces the window. Very right. You have electric light, I see, near the fireplace and above your bed. Then it is possible to switch on a bright light at any time. Valuable, that." Having finished a minute inspection of the room, and to the amusement of the bankers, having looked under the bed to make sure that no one had hidden himself beneath it, Fandor declared: "I am decidedly pleased with this room, and if you see no objection, I wish to stay here and wait the visitors of to night." "You think of sleeping here alone?" "Alone? Decidedly I do! It is pretty certain that these men know every inch of your flat, and if they are the sort I take them to be, they will make certain that everything here is as usual before attempting to attack the bank. I do not wish them to be frightened off by finding a companion at my side, and I particularly wish them to mistake me for you." "But that is frightfully dangerous, surely?" objected Nanteuil. "Reassure yourself, monsieur, I do not run any great risk. They won't know I am watching them, but I shall have this advantage over them: I am on the look out for the rascally assassins and robbers, and I do not fear them in the slightest." Fandor was not going to own that he knew there was danger, but he was keenly set on running this particular risk, for, by so doing, might he not discover the truth? When the bankers left him for the night, Fandor again examined every corner of the room, and all it contained. He tested the electric light switch. He took a mental photograph of the situation of the pieces of furniture. He got into bed, half dressed, and lay quietly, grasping his revolver, fully loaded. He switched off the light, and in that large room, veiled in darkness, he awaited the events of the night. The noises from the street reached him indistinctly. The silence about him was menacing. Something was going to happen here, something sudden, unforeseen, perhaps irremediable. Minute by minute, time went by, interminable, monotonous, casting a soft veil of sleep over the eyes of Fandor. But thoughts were rising within him. More and more keenly he was realising the horrible danger he was exposing himself to. Beneath closed eyes his brain was active, his imagination afire. "Elizabeth Dollon must be avenged," was his persistent thought. "Consequently, I must run some risks to achieve that." A definite fear tormented him. He thought of the curious sleep Elizabeth had fallen victim to in the boarding house. "Provided I have not taken some narcotic without knowing it! Suppose the villains are going to inject into the room some gas which would suffocate me, and I should not know I was breathing it in! Suppose I lose consciousness and slip into death!" But Fandor drew himself together. He stiffened his will. "Do they know I am in this room waiting to entrap them? Do they think they will find Nanteuil here defenceless? Who was that workman? I ought to be able to put a name to that familiar face." How slow, how deadly slow, the tic-tac of the timepiece! Centuries passed between the striking of the hours. Would it be to night, to morrow night, or...? On the corridor carpet outside the room a slight rustling sound, continuous, barely perceptible, caught Fandor's listening ear. Who was it? Was it anyone at all? Was it imagination? He listened intently. Not a sound now. But yes, the same rustling sound. It was nearer, moving along the wall.
Fandor closed his eyes an instant, so vividly did he feel that someone was looking at him through the wall. Seconds beat by, seconds that might culminate in a moment of horror, seconds passing steadily by in regular succession, sinking into nothingness. Had someone moved? Were there steps by the door? Fandor thought he heard strange sounds all around him, in the room itself. His nerves were tensely strung, he was overwrought. Someone was certainly walking in the corridor. He had felt a movement along the wall against which his bed stood. Impossible to hesitate longer. The doorknob, which he could not see in the darkness, must have moved. Fandor sensed this movement as surely as though he himself had placed his hand on the knob. Yes, the door was going to open. It was ajar, it was turning on its hinges, it was open. Someone was coming in. Who? Fandor lay still. He dared not move an eyelid, but in his mind he said: "Come in, then! Take the trouble to come in!" Thus Fandor, who believed death was entering the room, dared to welcome the grim visitor with a smile. Nothing was happening. Fandor's feverish excitement sank down to depression. He must have deceived himself. No one was entering the room, nothing untoward was happening. He had simply imagined the noises outside in the corridor, for nothing happened, nothing. And once more he was following the eternal tic-tac, tic-tac of the timepiece. The head of Fandor's bed was near the door. He could not, in the dense darkness, fix the point where he supposed the enemy would find him, and he had the agonising conviction that they were very much at their ease, that they knew exactly where he was, and were quietly preparing their attack. But had these unknown assassins entered the room? Yes, it was certain. There were men behind him, bending over him with outstretched hands to strangle him. He could hear the sound their fingers made in passing through the air to grip his throat, to squeeze his life out. Though he lived 100 years, never could Fandor forget the agonising thrill when he sensed that hidden danger. He held his revolver ready to fire. He thought: "In whatever way I am attacked, I must not let slip this unique chance to learn the truth. I must seize the attacker at all costs, and leap to the electric switch, turn on the light, and I shall be saved! Saved!" Without a cry, without a warning sound, without a moment's time to cope with the violence of the attack, Fandor felt a cloth over his face, strong hands on his throat, a heavy weight crushing his chest. "I am lost!" flashed through his mind. "I meant to find out the truth," his will declared. With all the force of resistant muscle and will he disengaged himself from the power crushing him to death, seized an arm by chance, hung on to it, gripped it, threw off the man, ran to the switch, shouting: "Help!" Again Fandor thought he was done for. The switch acted, but no light flashed forth. They had cut the wire. Men were holding on to him, their grip was tightening. A voice gave a strangled cry: "Help!" A strange voice? Whose? Fandor was weakening. His right hand seemed to be caught in a vice which would break and crush it. It was growing tighter and tighter. It was wrenching his arm, was dragging him backwards. It would fracture his shoulder blade. Who? Who? By a miraculous effort he freed himself. He leaped away, sprang to the mantelpiece, seized a pocket electric torch he had placed there. Clack! A light flashed out. Fandor saw, recognised his attacker. Ah, the form he had seen before! A slim figure clothed in black. Ah, this murderer whose face was concealed by a hooded mask! Fandor shouted at him: "Fantômas! It is you and I, Fantômas!" But already this mysterious bandit, unmasked by the unexpected light, had rushed on our journalist. The electric torch was extinguished. The struggle recommenced, fierce, formidable, desperate. Fandor was seized by the throat in a strangling grip. He was choking. His right arm, so twisted, so bruised, was powerless, and in that hand, now so deadened and helpless that it seemed detached from his body, was his revolver. He must shoot, though almost powerless in the formidable grip of the bandit. He must shoot if he was to be saved. He managed to pull the trigger. There was a loud report. Fandor felt himself flung towards the wall. The vice loosed its grip. There was a terrific din. The window panes were shattered. A heavy piece of furniture was pushed aside, oscillated, fell with a crash, then a sudden silence. But a silence broken by gaspings, loud breathings, hoarse sounds, an agonising death rattle. The dead pause seemed interminable. Fandor was about to shoot again, when a voice close to him cried: "He is escaping!" "He is escaping!" Fandor recognized that voice. Another voice said: "We must have a light!" A wax match flamed and flared. By its wavering light Fandor could distinguish 3 men in the room. Their clothes were torn, there was blood on their faces, they were panting, they stared at one another. Fandor recognized them instantly. Leaning against the bed, a gash in his cheek, was Monsieur Barbey. Lying on the floor, apparently half dead, was Monsieur Nanteuil. Calmly lighting a candle was the telephone workman. He alone seemed unmoved. Fandor threw down his revolver and, coolly marching to the door, locked it. Monsieur Barbey followed the journalist with a look. He made a gesture of discouragement and pointed to the window. Its panes were smashed to pieces. "We are tricked, done," he said. "The assassin has got away." But Fandor, with a shrug, marched up to the window, returned, and said in a matter-of-fact tone: "It is impossible that Fantômas could have made his escape that way." The workman nodded gravely. "Monsieur Fandor," said he, "I am entirely of your opinion." End of Chapter 26. Read by Don W. Jenkins. Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Section 27 of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 27. The Imprint. "Monsieur Fandor, I am entirely of your opinion." Hearing these words, Fandor, who had regained his self-possession, and was ready to start fighting again if necessary, looked at the individual who had made this statement, the individual whose face was oddly familiar. "Who are you?" he asked. The individual smiled broadly. "Don't you recognise me?" he asked. He removed his wig, threw the candle light on himself, and smilingly announced his style and title: "Sergeant Juve, once of the detective force, formerly dead, now amateur policeman." "You! Juve!" cried Fandor. "And to think I suspected you!" But the two bankers interrupted at one and the same moment: "What are you doing here?" Juve smiled. "The art I practised brought me. Since my interest in the Dollon affair is so keen, I follow it up. I wish to find the secret of it, just through love of my art. I dabble in it nowadays." "But, Juve, how did you get here?" questioned Fandor. "Aha! If you have made some psychological discoveries, if reasoning has landed you here, now facts have led me here. You know I was shadowing the band of Numbers. You know that in the skin of Cranajour I was intimate with those rascals. To my astonishment, I found that my wretched companions had dealings with the Barbey Nanteuil bank, who, of course, had no suspicion of it. Are you surprised, then, that I felt it incumbent on me to visit this bank? Besides, yesterday I saw you enter here, but you never came out again. You had reasons for acting so. I determined to be near you in case you needed my help. I therefore passed myself off as a workman, come to attend to the telephone installation. It was easy enough, for I am a good electrician. Well, when I found that you were preparing to pass the night here, I laid my plans accordingly. I pretended to leave the premises, but really I hid myself in the house. Just now, when you called for help, I came to your aid as quickly as I could, naturally." "Just as we did," remarked Monsieur Barbey, looking at his partner. Monsieur Nanteuil contented himself with a nod. He added: "Alas, once again that criminal has escaped. Fantômas, since it was Fantômas who was here just now, Fantômas has got away." And Nanteuil pointed to the broken window by which it would seem the criminal, taking advantage of the noise, had escaped. Both Fandor and Juve shrugged doubtfully. "You believe then, Monsieur Nanteuil, that Fantômas has left this room?" questioned our young journalist. "What the devil do you mean?" asked Nanteuil. Juve demanded: "Which way did he make his escape?" Nanteuil pointed: "Why, that way, by this window. Where else? You can see quite well that he has broken the panes. Why, look, his hooded cloak has got caught in the window latch." Fandor lay back in an arm chair. He seemed much amused. He silenced Juve with a gesture, and turned to Nanteuil: "I can assure dear Monsieur Nanteuil that Fantômas has not left the room by this window." "Because?"
"Because this window has been broken by means of this chair which he flung against the panes to put us on the wrong scent, and make us believe he had escaped that way. Just look at this chair, it is still strewn with broken bits of glass. Look, there is even a little bit stuck into the wood." "But that proves nothing. Fantômas has broken the window panes as best he could, and then made his escape." "In that case," insisted Fandor, "dear Monsieur Nanteuil, can you explain how it was he troubled to remove his cloak, hood and all, and after that, how is it he has left no footprints in the flower beds beneath the window? When day dawns you will see for yourself that my statement is correct, though I have not verified it. The flower beds are too wide, too big for a man jumping from here to jump clear of them, and the earth is soft enough to take and retain the footprints of a man who leaps down on to them from this height. Nevertheless, such footprints are conspicuous by their absence." Monsieur Barbey seemed overwhelmed, aghast. "If Fantômas did not escape by the window, how then did he get away?" he asked. Fandor said in clear, distinct tones: "Fantômas was not able to escape." "But he cannot be in the room. Where then can he have hidden himself?" In a hard voice, Fandor made answer: "He is not hidden in the room." "You think then that he has hidden himself somewhere in the house?" Speaking in the same hard, decisive tone, Fandor asserted: "He is not hidden in the house. In the very height of the struggle, I kept a strict watch on the direction taken by the man who was doing his utmost to strangle me. I am positive I had my back against the door when I fired, so that exit was barred. Neither by door nor window did Fantômas escape." Fandor's tone was one of absolute assurance. "If you are certain of that," said Nanteuil, "can you tell us how Fantômas did escape?" Fandor's reply was to rise from his arm chair. He took the candlestick from the table where Juve had placed it, and walked towards a large mirror. He carefully examined his neck. "Very curious," said he in a low voice. "Now, monsieur, the man who tried to strangle me was Fantômas. We have seen him. Well, this man had a wound on his thumb, or more probably he wounded me. Anyhow, he has left on my collar the mark of his thumb in blood. You guess what this thumb mark is?" Simultaneously, Barbey, Nanteuil and Juve rushed towards the young journalist. Fandor showed them a little red mark, clear cut on the white surface of the collar. It was a finger print, so characteristic that the two bankers cried in a trembling voice: "Again the imprint of Jacques Dollon!" Silence fell, a pregnant silence. The four men gazed at one another. Fandor soon started whistling a popular air. Juve smiled. Monsieur Barbey was the first to speak. "Good heavens! Do you mean to say that Jacques Dollon was here, in this room? It is certain, you say, Monsieur Fandor, that he did not get away either by door or window? For pity's sake, explain the mystery!" But Fandor contented himself with a smile and a question: "Do you really think, then, that I know it?" Nanteuil stamped with impatience. "But hang it all, if you don't know anything, don't let us waste time! Let us begin the search! Hunt through the house, search the garden from end to end!" Fandor went on. His tone was ironic. "And warn the police? Well, no, Monsieur Nanteuil, we will not make any search whatever, you can rely on that. For the last 3 months we have been striving and struggling to solve a maddening mystery. We never could reach a certain solution of it. We have been vainly pursuing an assassin who for ever escaped us. And now, when for once we get a hold of a definite fact, an indisputable reality, are we going to risk muddling up the whole business? Not if I know it!" "What do you mean?" demanded Monsieur Barbey. "Listen," replied Fandor. "Some minutes ago I was alone in this room. Jacques Dollon entered the room, because I bear on my neck the imprint of his thumb. Jacques Dollon was Fantômas, because he declared it himself when he believed he would emerge victorious from the struggle. Jacques Dollon, Fantômas, has not left this room, either by door or window. On the other hand, you have entered the room, you, Monsieur Barbey, you, Monsieur Nanteuil, and you, Juve. Since these individuals have entered the room and no one has left it, it necessarily follows that the personage, Jacques Dollon, Fantômas, must have entered among you, and that he has remained here, between these four walls." Simultaneously, Barbey and Nanteuil raised protesting voices, but Juve continued to smile. "Do you believe, then But Jérôme Fandor did not allow him to finish. "I do not think anything," said he. "I know that I, Jérôme Fandor, am I, and that I am not Jacques Dollon. Juve knows that he is Juve, and that he is not Jacques Dollon. You, Monsieur Barbey, you, Monsieur Nanteuil, you know who you are, and who you are not. None of us can leave imprints similar to those of Jacques Dollon. But I also know that Jacques Dollon has entered this room, and that he has not left it. This is all that I know." To this extraordinary declaration, Monsieur Nanteuil, with an incredulous shrug of the shoulders, exclaimed: "This is downright madness, monsieur!" But Juve congratulated Fandor. "That's logic, my boy! You are going it strong, lad!" Fandor continued: "It follows that if Jacques Dollon has not left the room, he must be here in this room. He must be arrested. In order to arrest him, we must beg Monsieur Havard to come here as fast as he possibly can. Jacques Dollon is Fantômas, or I should say Fantômas is Jacques Dollon. Monsieur Havard will not hesitate to put himself to any inconvenience in order to effect such a capture. I am going to call him up at once, messieurs, thanks to this telephone." And, profiting by the bewilderment of his hearers, Fandor then and there telephoned to police headquarters. He spoke to one of the officials, who undertook to inform his chief that he was wanted at the telephone on most urgent business. A minute or two later, Fandor was telling Monsieur Havard what had happened. He terminated his narrative thus: "I myself had locked the door of the room in which the struggle took place. No one left the room, nor shall anyone leave it before your arrival. I give you my word of honour on that. Come post haste. It is of the utmost urgency. Bring a locksmith. He must open the great door of the house. He will have to force open the door of the room in which we now are. I must keep an incessant watch over this room. I do not see Fantômas, Jacques Dollon, in this room, but in this room he must inevitably be. He is in it." Fandor, listening to Monsieur Havard's answer, repeated it to his companions. "In a very short time the chief will be here. In a very short time, messieurs, we shall witness the arrest of Fantômas, that is, of the most inhuman monster that has ever existed." "It seems to me you are going too fast," remarked Monsieur Barbey. "All is mystery, yet you talk of making an arrest." "What do you consider mysterious now?" asked Fandor, laughing. "Why, everything. Take one thing: do you know what were the motives of the different Fantômas Dollon crimes?" Juve replied to this: "Oh, as for that, perfectly. The motives are clear as crystal. Madame de Vibray was ruined and really committed suicide, because you will pardon me, I am sure because the Bourse transactions you advised were not successful. She poisoned herself and went to Jacques Dollon's studio to die. Perhaps she felt for him a secret attachment. Fate willed it that the assassins should choose this very evening to make their way into the painter's studio. By means of this first corpse they created an alibi for themselves, and prepared the scene which was bound to mislead justice and make lawyers and police believe in the murder of Madame de Vibray and the suicide of her murderer. Unfortunately for them, Dollon was discovered before the poison they administered had done its deadly work on him, and Dollon was arrested. You can imagine the fury, the distracted state of the guilty. Dollon had seen them. He was going to speak at the legal interrogation. Very well, then, they will kill him, and they do kill him." "But Jacques Dollon lives, since his imprints are found here, there, and everywhere!" cried Monsieur Barbey. Fandor replied: "They kill Jacques Dollon, since it has been formally established that Jacques Dollon was seen dead; and once they have killed Dollon, they think that a dead man cannot be arrested by the police, and they accept this dead man as one of their band. He, they decide, shall steal the pearls of Princess Danidoff." "This is a raving lunacy!" "All that is pretty clearly proved, Monsieur Nanteuil. It is he also who stole the millions in the rue du Quatre Septembre, a sensational robbery which would have ruined your bank, had not this issue of bullion been well covered by an insurance. This insurance signified that you were no losers by this robbery. In fact, owing to an ingenious combination of insurances, you have actually gained by the robbery. As we are on this subject, I might add that were I a member of the band, I should propose restoring to you the vanished ingots. Robbers find bullion somewhat difficult to put into circulation. You might buy them back, then turn them into false coin, for instance. That would be all profit for you." "I wonder at you making such a joke as that," remarked Nanteuil.
Please wonder at me. To continue, having carried out their plan successfully, these robbers remembered something they had forgotten, a compromising paper, or something like it, which had been left in Elizabeth Dollon's possession. Thereupon they send the dead man, Jacques Dollon, to look for it. He attempts to murder his sister. I arrive just in time to open the windows before she has passed all human aid. Meanwhile, a series of cleverly arranged deals on the Bourse are brought off, so that if Thomery disappeared, the Barbey Nanteuil bank would rake in important profits. In haste, the assassins get rid of an accomplice who is in their way, that duffer of a Jules, the rue Raffet servant, and they send Dollon to kill Thomery. After that, they decide to rob your bank, which is stuffed with gold, for were it not for this theft it would be your bank, burdened as it is with Thomery shares, which would pay out to speculators the differences in value between past and present prices, which amounts would have to come out of the money paid in the day before. Messieurs, with regard to this, Thomery's death did you a great service. Without his death, which enriched you, you would have had to settle up your sales by a certain date, and you would have lost more than you gained at the moment, owing to the sole fact of his disappearance. I think you are very grateful to Jacques Dollon because of what he has done for you." Monsieur Nanteuil, on hearing these last words, rose. He walked up to the journalist and said, in a voice quivering with some emotion: "For my part, Monsieur Fandor, I think your way of explaining the Dollon affair is a very strange way. You assert that this painter is dead, and you make him behave as if he were alive. Besides, I have understood your words. In truth, what you say is senseless. You make wild statements. You have involved our bank in every one of the Dollon crimes. You have shown us as interested parties in all these robberies." Fandor said quietly: "Nevertheless, it is unquestionably true that you are the gainers by these crimes, beginning with Madame de Vibray and ending with Thomery. Madame de Vibray might have brought an action against you for the loss of her fortune, owing to your risky speculations and bad management. Thomery's murder brought down his shares with a run, and you found that a most advantageous state of affairs. You gained by it. But, of course, this is coincidence, since you are not Fantômas, since you are not Jacques Dollon, since you cannot imitate the imprint of his thumb. I have only said this to show..." Fandor stopped short. "Hark! Someone is coming upstairs. Here is Monsieur Havard." As the bankers were hurrying impatiently to the door, Fandor said in a bantering tone: "Do not stir a step further, I beg of you. Not a step. Let us receive the chief of the detective force exactly in the position we were not an hour ago, when we encountered him whom the chief has now come to arrest." Barbey and Nanteuil returned to their former positions. Those in the room could hear voices on the other side of the door exchanging brief remarks. The lock was being picked. Monsieur Havard entered and hurried up to the journalist. "Well, my dear Fandor, I have followed all your instructions to the letter. Ah, you here too, Juve? Well, speak! Anything fresh since your extraordinary telephone communication? What were you telling me?" "I was saying, Monsieur Havard, that the assassin had entered this room, and assuredly had not left it: that he was here." "Here?" Monsieur Havard had recognised the bankers at the first glance. His question betrayed a certain incredulity which piqued Fandor. "Here! Yes, that is absolutely so, because it is impossible that he can have left the room. Besides, you shall convince yourself of that. Monsieur Nanteuil, will you do me a small service? Will you draw a plan of the first floor of your house?" The banker rose and seated himself at his writing table, which was placed in a corner of the room. "I am at your disposal." And he began to trace a plan, a pretty rough one, of the various rooms which made up the first floor of his house. "Is that what you want?" he asked. Jérôme Fandor rose quickly and went towards Nanteuil. The journalist's nerves must have been out of order, in a jumpy state, despite his apparent calm, for in approaching the writing table he suddenly staggered, nearly fell, tried to regain his balance, and that so clumsily that he upset the contents of a large ink pot on the writing desk. "Take care!" said Monsieur Nanteuil, who, to save himself from coming into contact with this inky inundation, threw himself back in his chair and lifted his hands above the flood of ink. The banker repeated: "Take care! Here is a fresh catastrophe!" But he did not finish what he intended to say. Quick as thought, Fandor steadied himself, and before anyone could guess his intention, he seized the banker's right hand, pushed it forcibly into the wide spreading ink,
then, immediately after, pressed it on to a sheet of blotting paper, which took the hand's imprint quite clearly. This imprint he glanced at but a moment. Like a flag, he waved it above his head. "It is the Jacques Dollon imprint!" he shouted. "The hand of Monsieur Nanteuil, whose characteristics are known in the anthropometric section, has just left the imprint of Jacques Dollon." The journalist's action created a momentary stupor. Juve rushed to him. "Bravo! Bravo!" he cried. But Monsieur Havard had gone quite pale. He said in a low voice: "I don't understand." Barbey and Nanteuil retained their self possession. Then Monsieur Barbey rose. He looked fixedly at his partner. He spoke in a tone of sad finality: "I suspected this. Farewell!" A shout of horror answered him. He had drawn a sharp dagger from inside his coat, and had plunged it in his heart up to the hilt. Juve knelt by the fallen man. Monsieur Havard kept a sharp eye on Nanteuil. "Here, then, is Jacques Dollon, the dead alive. Here is the elusive Fantômas," said the chief of the detective force. But the bandit brazened it out as he recoiled before the chief. "Why do you arrest me because of this imprint?" he demanded. "It is a piece of juggling on the part of this journalist. Take a fresh imprint of my hand, my fingers, my thumb, and you will see whether my hand could possibly leave such an impression as that put on the blotting pad by some sleight of hand trick of this much too smart reporter." He stretched out his arm in the direction of the blotting pad, as though begging for a fresh trial. Fandor marched up to Nanteuil. "Useless," said he in a curt tone. "I have been watching you. I know the trick." Nanteuil stood stock still, dumb. Fandor lifted the cuff of Nanteuil's coat, and pointed out to Monsieur Havard and to Juve a sort of thin film of glove-like form. It was fastened to the wrist by an almost imperceptible piece of elastic. "This is human skin," said Fandor. "Human skin marvellously preserved by some special process. All its lines and marks are intact. Can you not guess whence it came? Do you need to be told whose dead body has supplied this phantom glove?" Monsieur Havard was as white as a sheet. "The body of Jacques Dollon!" he murmured. "Yes, that is it!" There was a moment's intense silence in the room. "How do you imagine this wretch set to work?" demanded Monsieur Havard. "Simple enough," replied Fandor. "Fantômas knows the danger criminals run owing to the exact science of anthropometry. He knows that every imprint denounces the assassin. He knows that it is difficult to do anything without leaving such imprints, and that is why, every time he has committed a crime, he has taken care to glove his hands in the skin of Jacques Dollon's hands." Nanteuil, at bay, attempted denial. "You are talking mere newspaper romance," said he. Fandor looked the banker in the eye. "Fantômas," said he, "do not attempt to deny what is no longer possible to deny. The trick is remarkably clever, and you have reason to be proud of your invention. Perhaps I should never have discovered it, if in this very room, this very night, you had not been imprudent enough to leave those imprints on my collar. No one had left the room, therefore the guilty person was in the room, of necessity he was. Therefore it followed that someone had the hands of Dollon. But how could this someone have the hands of Dollon? Of course, naturally, the idea of these gloves occurred to me." Fandor turned to the chief of the detective force. "Monsieur Havard, Madame de Vibray committed suicide because she lost her fortune through Barbey Nanteuil mismanagement. She might even have been poisoned by them. But that does not matter. Her death might compromise the bank. They carried her dead body to Jacques Dollon's studio, and they tried to poison this painter in order to put the law off their track. You know Dollon was saved. He was a dangerous witness. They killed him in his cell, some warder being accessory to the fact, killed him before his innocence could be established. Then they took his hands, that they might commit murders with them. Dollon is dead, as I have held all along. It is Nanteuil who has committed the crimes ascribed to the most unfortunate Dollon. These crimes have profited the Barbey Nanteuil bank, as I pointed out just now." Whilst Nanteuil stood speechless, whilst Barbey, whom they had lifted to a sofa, was gasping out his last breath, whilst Juve was giving little nods of approval to what his dear lad was saying, Fandor was treating Monsieur Havard to a further version of the affair. "When I telephoned you, I was morally certain of the approaching arrest. Not a soul quitted the room after the hands of Dollon had left the imprints on my collar and on my neck. Therefore, someone had the hands of Dollon. The finger imprints of all the personages present were known to me. Therefore someone had a method by which he changed his own fingerprints into those of Dollon. How was it done? It must be a remarkable method or means. Why, of course, it could only be by a pair of gloves that the trick was done. Of course, it must be by means of a pair of gloves made from the skin of Jacques Dollon's hands. I noticed that Nanteuil kept his hands obstinately behind his back. I guessed that it was he who had played the part of Dollon tonight, so I managed to prevent him removing those Dollon gloves, that I might take their imprint before your eyes. The rest can be guessed, can it not? The imprint taken, profiting by the confusion, Nanteuil slipped off the glove, which, as you see, was no thicker than a cigarette when rolled up. To throw it aside was risky. He pushed it up his sleeve while pretending to arrange his cuff, and at the same time to put ink on his ungloved hand and so hide his trick. Only I saw it all. Monsieur Havard, it is not only the false Jacques Dollon I denounce, for Juve and I fully realize that he is also the elusive Fantômas. Here is this cloak with hooded mask, which is an irrefutable proof. Besides, he himself declared he was Fantômas. Monsieur Havard, all you have to do now is seize this man. Juve and I will hand him over to you." It was a thrilling moment. Juve and Fandor, in this hour of decisive victory, mutely embraced. Monsieur Havard advanced with raised hands towards Nanteuil, who retreated. "Fantômas," he commenced, "in the name of the law, I are..." The word was strangled in his throat. As he advanced another step, Nanteuil suddenly sprang backwards, and his hand rested on the moulding of a wooden panel. At the same moment, Monsieur Havard, as if hampered by some invisible obstacle, stretched his length on the floor. Juve and Fandor were about to rush to his aid, but while Fandor in his turn measured his length on the floor also, Juve yelled: "Good Lord! We are caught! He escapes!" Whilst the detective made a frantic effort to move a step, he seemed nailed to the floor. Fantômas, quick as lightning, leaped over the prone body of Monsieur Havard, gained the door, and banged it to behind him. They heard a triumphant burst of laughter. Fantômas was escaping. "This is sorcery!" shouted the chief of the detective force in a voice hoarse with rage. "Take your boots off! Take your boots off!" yelled Juve, who, with bare feet, was rushing through the house, revolver in hand, hoping to come up with the banker bandit. But, when the detective arrived at the entrance gateway of the house, he found the policemen brought by Monsieur Havard chatting away quietly. They had not seen a thing. The street was deserted. In a second, Fantômas had disappeared, vanished into thin air. He, the elusive one, had got away. Once more he had escaped those who were pursuing him with such keen determination. "It is very simple," explained Juve to Monsieur Havard and Fandor, who seemed deprived of speech. "Yes, it is simple enough. I guessed it at once when I saw you fall, Monsieur Havard, just after Fantômas had pressed the woodwork." "He pressed an electric button, did he not?" "Yes, Fandor, he established a current. The wretch must have placed powerful electric magnets under the floor, and the moment he realised that it was impossible to brazen it out any longer, was on the very point of being arrested, he established the current. So we three were nailed to the ground by the attraction exercised by these electromagnets on the nails of our shoes. He, Fantômas, was then free to cut and run for it, whose shoes must certainly have had soles made of some insulating material." Monsieur Havard and Fandor made no answer to this. To have held Fantômas at their mercy, if only for a minute! To have believed that they were going to lay hands on the atrocious criminal at last! To have seen him slip through their fingers! The thought of this almost brought tears to their eyes. They were in a state of deepest despondency. "There's a curse on us!" cried Fandor. "This time, at any rate, we have nothing to reproach ourselves with. We could not foresee that." Then, to himself, in a low tone, he added: "Poor Elizabeth! How are we to tell her that we have let her brother's murderer escape?" End of Chapter 27. Read by Don W. Jenkins. Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Section 28 of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 28. Courage. "Have some more chicken?" "No, thanks, I am not hungry." "But you should eat all the same." "Are you eating anything yourself?" "Faith, I am not." "Well, then?" In the private room of the Fat Pheasant restaurant, where Juve and Fandor were dining, silence again fell. The two men sat motionless, gazing into space. They neither wished to eat food nor do anything at all. They were depressed to the last degree. They felt baffled. They were sick of every mortal thing. All of a sudden, Fandor burst into tears. Juve, looking at his dear lad in such grief, bit his lip. His face, with wrinkled brow, wore a dejected, worried look. An hour or two previous to that, Fandor, on returning to his flat, had found a black-edged envelope, the address in Elizabeth Dollon's handwriting. Fandor had opened it with fast-beating heart and trembling hand. For these past days an evil fate seemed relentlessly pursuing them. Now he feared to read of some fresh catastrophe. He was reassured by the opening lines, but as he read on, and took in the meaning of Elizabeth's words, Fandor felt as though his heart were bursting with grief. Elizabeth Dollon had written: "I seem to be going mad. Yes, I love you. Yesterday I should have been glad to become your wife, but there came by the same post as your letter another, which contained terrible revelations. Proofs of their truth were given me. I have not the right to curse you, or rather I have not the strength to do it. But never will I marry you, Jérôme Fandor, you, Charles Rambert." [Footnote 11. See Fantômas and the Exploits of Juve.] It seemed to Fandor that everything was turning round about him. He took a few steps, staggering. The weight of this terrible past, a past in which he was the innocent victim, but of which he could not clear himself, overwhelmed him. Fandor cried in a voice of despair: "Fantômas! Fantômas has taken his revenge!" And before the astounded portress, the unhappy young man turned about and fell in a heap on the ground. On the other hand, shortly after the extraordinary flight of the banker, Nanteuil, to the world in general, but Fantômas to him and Fandor, Juve had received from Monsieur Allain, the supreme head of the police detective department, who only manifested himself on sensational occasions, a note sent by pneumatic post: "Regret keenly that you revealed your personality in such ridiculous circumstances, and that you failed to arrest a great criminal." As Juve read these observations, he clenched his fists, he grew livid with rage. Dinner was a mere farce for the two friends. They did not dine, they had no appetite. Juve and Fandor went over and over in their minds the deplorable events of which, all said and done, they were the victims. They gazed at each other full of self-pity. They felt they were two derelicts afloat on the immense sea of indifferent humanity. "The worst suffering," said Fandor, with tears of misery in his voice, "is the pain of love." "The most painful of wounds," said Juve bitterly, "is a wound to self-respect." These two, men every inch of them, might have their moments of discouragement, but they were a sporting pair of the finest quality. "Fandor!" "Juve?" "You are courageous?" "I have courage, Juve." "Very well, my lad, let us sponge out the past and start off afresh in pursuit of Fantômas. I tell you the struggle has only begun. Listen." End of Chapter 28. End of Messengers of Evil, by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. Recorded by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com.